Chapter 722. Have you heard? Prince Heng's men were robbed by a group of strong men yesterday. What do you mean by heard? I saw it with my own eyes. Just this morning, hundreds of people were tied naked to trees. That scene, tsk, immoral. It's really immoral. That's nothing. I also heard that when these people came back, they all covered their buttocks. I didn't expect the first prince's men to like this. Could it be that he also, today, there was a lot of discussion in Feng State City. People could be heard talking about something on the streets and alleys. That was because that piece of news was simply too shocking to them. Early in the morning, a woodcutter had just walked into the forest when he saw 100 people being stripped naked and tied to a tree. Perhaps because of the morning, some uncontrollable changes had occurred to their bodies. Just thinking about it was a spectacular sight. That kind of scene and that kind of image would linger in the mind of anyone who saw it for the rest of their lives. Ever since the first prince had come to Feng State, he had been arresting people and discussing the crime. Now, he had done such a thing. It had firmly occupied the headlines of Feng State daily. It was believed that this incident would occupy the headlines for a long time. When Lin Yong told Lin Wanru about these things, it was, of course, the edited version. I don't know where this strong man came from. He did things so decisively. It's so satisfying. His face was full of excitement. Then, he put something on the table and said, "Miss, this is what you wanted." He looked at the poetry book that he had just bought and asked, "Miss, is the Li brothers really the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom? Were these poems and lyrics also written by him?" Lin Wanru didn't answer. Lin Yong looked around, shook his head, and walked out. Anyway, that was what the people outside said. When he bought the poetry book, he was almost squeezed out by the young ladies. He really didn't expect that a pretty boy like the Li brothers would be so popular with women. Lin Yong walked to the entrance of Fenglin Park and looked in a certain direction out of habit. He couldn't help but lick his lips. It's almost time to eat again. At this time, in a county town located at the border of the Qi Kingdom's Qing province, a group of over 100 caravans had stopped. They were seated in the largest restaurant in the county town. That's all there is to making money. Fang didn't forget to sigh as he chewed on the pork shoulder. He had the capital to be arrogant. In one night, he had produced 600,000 taels of silver. Anyone could be a little arrogant. However, there was a slight delay in time. Bing province was not far from Feng province. Presumably, they had already received the news. With more than 100 people and so many carriages and goods, it was destined that they would not be able to travel very quickly. The original plan might have to be slightly altered. Yang Liuqing took out a map and spread it on the table. He pointed at a place in front of them and said, "Marshal Uncle, with our current speed, it will take us 1.5 days to reach Chongzhou. If we travel at top speed from Fengzhou, we can reach there in a day. So, we can't go back through Chongzhou. Is there any other way?" Yang Liuqing nodded. He used his finger to draw on the map and said, "If we go west from here, we can go around Chongzhou. It might take us a few days, but it's safe enough." Although they had 2 grandmasters and over 100 top-notch martial arts masters, it wouldn't be a problem for them to break through a city that wasn't heavily guarded. They had to go back. It was better not to cause so much trouble. If they really did that, they were afraid that casualties would be unavoidable. It was not worth it. Li Yi looked at the map. Yang Liuqing explained, "If we go west from here for another day, we will almost reach the border of the Wu Kingdom. We can go around here. This is the chaotic land where the Qi Kingdom, Jing Kingdom, and Wu Kingdom intersect. If we go through here, we can go around Chongzhou. In another 2 days, we will reach Shuzhou." Fang asked doubtfully, "Didn't you say that place is very chaotic? I heard that there are countless mountain bandits and bandits running amok. Will there be trouble?" Yang Liuqing shook her head and said, "This mountain range stretches on and on. There are countless mountain bandits and bandits here. But the really powerful mountain bandits are all in the depths. The power is complicated, and the specific situation is not that simple. In short, there are only some small bandits on the periphery. There are no more than dozens of people, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked, "You are very familiar with this place?" Yang Liuqing was stunned. She nodded and said, "I learned about it when I came here." There shouldn't be much difference. The slovenly old man looked at Yang Liuqing meaningfully and spat out the chicken bone in his mouth. He said, "This girl is right. Although that place is a little chaotic, as long as we don't go too deep and encounter those hard-to-chew bones, there won't be any big problem." Even the slovenly old man said that it was hard to chew bones. It seemed that that place was really not simple. Li Yi looked at the map carefully. This time, they just passed the periphery, so there shouldn't be any problem. He nodded and said, "Then let's go here." King of Shu's mansion, Shuzhou. King of Shu paced anxiously in the hall with a gloomy expression. When footsteps came from outside the hall, he immediately asked before the person who came in said anything, "How is it? Any news from there?" The person bowed and said, "Your Highness, I have confirmed it from the people of the Secret Intelligence Office. They did find County Marquis Li in the Qi Kingdom and will come back soon." Bang! Sure enough, he is in the Qi Kingdom. King of Shu punched the table and squeezed out a few words through his teeth. These days, he had almost mobilized all the government offices in Shuzhou and even sent out the guards of the king's mansion. In order to find him, he had spent a lot of effort. He didn't expect that Li Yi was not in the Jing Kingdom or Shuzhou at all. Didn't that mean that all the effort he put in was for naught? Thinking of this, King of Shu immediately felt that he had been fooled. One person thought for a moment and said tentatively, "Your Highness, they will return to Shuzhou eventually." "Why don't we? Shuzhou has now been taken over by the Secret Intelligence Office." In the crowd, Jiang Zian glanced at the person and said, "At first, General Fan thought the same as you. Now grass can grow on his grave." Thinking of something, the person stopped talking and his face immediately turned pale. The people of the Secret Intelligence Office from the Jing Kingdom wanted to take over the military power on the first day they arrived in Shuzhou. Shuzhou was far away from the emperor, so the orders from the Jing Kingdom had little effect here. It had always been like this. On that day, a garrison general said that the request of the Secret Intelligence Office was unreasonable and he would not hand over the power even if he died. As a result, he really died. He had just been buried not long ago, but not long after, grass would grow on his grave. King of Shu didn't speak, but the blue veins on his forehead couldn't help throbbing. As the first prince, he was suppressed every step he took in the Jing Kingdom and was even beaten in front of the civil and military officials. Now he came to Shuzhou and couldn't make decisions on his own feet. This was the most depressing thing in his heart. The atmosphere in the hall was a little depressing. At this time, another servant of the prince's mansion came in and said, "Your Highness, young Master Fang Yongfang wants to see you." King of Shu nodded and said, "Let him in." Chapter 723. Your Highness, King of Shu. The young man surnamed Fang came in from outside. He first bowed to King of Shu, and then turned his head to look around. King of Shu looked around, waved his hand, and said, "You can leave now." Hearing this, everyone left one after another. Only King of Shu and the young man surnamed Fang were left in the hall. King of Shu looked at him and said lightly, "Li Yi is coming back." What? Fang Yong's expression changed immediately. He went to the Qi Kingdom recently and will be back soon. King of Shu looked at him and asked, "Can your people get rid of him before he arrives in Shuzhou?" Fang Yong's expression changed for a while. He shook his head and said, "No." The power of the holy religion in Shuzhou was weak. Her Majesty was injured and had not recovered yet. A large number of masters gathered in Shuzhou some time ago suddenly appeared and then disappeared. It was said that they went to the Qi Kingdom. Now that he thought about it, it must have something to do with Li Yi. With the remaining power of the holy religion in Shuzhou, even if another guru came, they would be at risk of being destroyed, let alone so many masters. The right thing to do was to escape before they came back. They didn't even dare to take back the token of the Blue Dragon ambassador. How could they have other plans? Didn't you say that you have 100,000 followers? King of Shu looked at him angrily and said, didn't you say that there are countless masters in your sect? You can't even handle such a small matter. How can I believe you? The young man surnamed Fong was expressionless. He lowered his head and said nothing. Hearing the voice of King of Shu coming from inside, full of anger and mania, the two guards at the door looked at each other and immediately became very cautious. At this time, His Highness could not be provoked. He would even severely punish them for not standing properly. This was not the first time such a thing had happened. Fortunately, it didn't take long before young Master Fong, who often came to the king's mansion, came out. He didn't look very good, and there was no sound in the hall. The two of them heaved a long sigh of relief because they didn't suffer any punishment because of their posture. Young Master Fong was in trouble. From the looks of it, he must have been scolded badly by the King of Shu. The two of them wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads. When they put down their hands, a voice came from the side. Who allowed you to wipe your sweat? The King of Shu looked at the two of them with cold eyes and said, each of you, go down and receive 50 strokes of the cane. The two of them looked at each other and tightened their grip on the sabers at their waists. In the end, they loosened their grip. At the same time, the youth surnamed Fong walked out of the King of Shu's residence. Two blue-robed men came forward and respectfully said, Protector. The youth with the surname Fong turned around and looked at the gate of the King of Shu's residence. He said coldly, we'll do it tonight. Son-in-law, shall we make our move? Fong rubbed his hands together and looked excitedly at a group of dozens of people with red scarves covering their heads. He turned around and asked Li Yi. Li Yi could finally confirm that Fong really had the genes of a bandit. They had already destroyed 3 bandit dens along the way, and after a while, the number would increase to 4. There was indeed a reason why this place was known as the Land of Chaos. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had encountered 3 groups of bandits with more than a dozen people. The last group even had more than 100 people. Such a group of bandits would be considered a small force in other places. However, in this place, they could only stay in the periphery. Usually, they would go down the mountain to rob livestock and food. Occasionally, small caravans would pass by and they would be fat sheep. If they ventured deeper into the mountains, they would either be annexed by other large bandit groups or lose their lives in the process of fighting for territory. In the beginning, Fong was still worried that there would be trouble bringing so many gold and silver goods through a place where bandits ran rampant. After encountering it twice, he gradually began to realize that being a bandit was his original profession. The group had already been moving for 2 days. Not only did the goods not decrease, they even increased. The 3 waves of mountain bandits were all suppressed by the group and their dens were raided. Unfortunately, the mountain bandits' nests weren't rich at all. Old Fong and the others only took the items that caught their eye and left the rest of the scrap metal untouched. A group of dozens of people like the one in front of them could be wiped out with just a few people. After a while, Fong came over with a smile and said, Young master, after we arrive in Shuzhou, do you want to put the goods down first and come again? This guy was really addicted to being a bandit. He had been in a state of excitement for the past 2 days. If he called the people from Willow Leaf Village, would they sweep all the nearby mountains? Except for the 2 gurus, the rest of the 100 or so people were the best of the best. If these people really followed him and became bandits, perhaps his original dream would come true. Li Yi now wanted to grow wings and fly back. He didn't have the time to do this. He glared at him and said, Hurry up. It's getting dark. Let's find a place to rest first and ask those bandits where their dens are. Fong responded and walked over. He slapped the head of the bandit and said, You're still wearing a red headscarf. You're a disgrace to us bandits. Tell me, where is your stronghold? The bandit leader asked in a trembling voice, You are also bandits? Fong slapped his head again and said, Don't talk so much nonsense. Lead the way. The bandit leader looked around. There were many people as strong as this strong man. One person could beat more than 10 of them. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. They were all bandits, but why was the gap between them so big? Fong slapped him again and said, "You're still looking. It's just ahead." All the bandits sighed and felt sad. They were all bandits. Why did bandits make things difficult for other bandits? Li Yi rode on the horse and followed behind Mississippi Lu. At a certain moment, he inadvertently looked up and saw the expression on her face and the flickering light in her eyes. He couldn't help but be stunned. 100 miles ahead, a group of nearly 100 people was slowly traveling on a rugged mountain path. "Lady Fong, we've been walking for a day. Do you want to stop and rest?" The man with the surname Fong lifted the curtain of the carriage and asked with concern. The middle-aged Taoist nun was sitting cross-legged in the carriage. Her face was pale and she looked rather weak. She opened her eyes and said, "It's getting dark. We'll go a little further and set up camp here before it gets dark." "Yes." The man with the surname Fong responded and immediately waved his hand behind him. He said loudly, "Move faster. We'll set up camp here before it gets dark." The man with the surname Fong tripped on a rock on the mountain path and staggered. After he steadied himself, he looked down and revealed an extremely gloomy expression. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about running into Li Yi while traveling through Chong province, they wouldn't be able to fight against those martial arts experts with their current manpower. Why would they take this path? At this moment, his heart was undoubtedly filled with deep resentment towards that detestable name. What he couldn't get over was that this person was clearly a great enemy of the holy religion. Yet, the Lady Fong had given him the token of the Blue Dragon envoy. He was afraid that there would be no small amount of trouble in the future. Thinking of this, he raised his head and glanced at the carriage in front of him. A look of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. Chapter 724. Fong Province, which had been shrouded in darkness for a long time, finally saw the light of dawn today. The reason was that the eldest prince and a group of supervising censors would leave Fong Province today. The actions of these people in Fong Province had a great impact on the people of Fong Province. Even a 3-year-old child knew that the first prince was not a good person. The words "supervising censor" were enough to stop children from crying at night. Of course, these people, including the eldest prince, had now become a joke in Fong Province. 100 personal guards made a fool of themselves in front of so many people. Early that morning, another censor with the surname Yang was sent back from Bing Province. He had been kidnapped by a group of robbers. Perhaps they were worried that the officials of the capital would be involved and the matter would be blown out of proportion, so they didn't make things difficult for him. Some insiders said that when the censor was sent back, other than becoming a bit deranged, there was nothing wrong with him. After the eldest prince and his entourage were sent out of the city gate, the entire Fong province ushered in a carnival. The night market, which had not been opened for a long time, was opened early when the sky had just darkened. Fong province was brightly lit, and every family was in a jubilant mood. Lin Yong looked at the lights coming from the small courtyard next to Fong Lin Garden. He walked through the courtyard and knocked on the door, saying, "Miss, the shopkeepers of the Ma, Su, and by families have been standing in front of the Lin family's door for a day and a night. Old master asked me to ask you if you want to see them." "It's too late. Let's talk about it tomorrow morning." After a long time, a voice came from the room again. "Tomorrow." Lin Yong nodded and looked up at the sky. There were no stars, so he shook his head and said, "Look at the weather, it might rain tonight." They are standing there in the cold. "I don't know where the Li brothers have gone to." In a small county town dozens of miles away from Fong province. In the relay station, Zhao Zheng looked at Zhao Yi and said in a deep voice, "I was framed." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "I know. They kidnapped Yang Kong." "He has the token of Prince Heng's mansion," Zhao Zheng said again. Zhao Yi nodded again and said, "I know. It's useless even if I know." He turned his head to look at Zhao Zheng and said, "In the end, the matter of discussing the silver of guilt was caused by imperial brother, and imperial father does not know." Zhao Yi sighed and said, "When you return to the capital this time, I'm afraid you have to make preparations." Zhao Jing clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. He couldn't understand how he, the Grand Crown Prince of the Qi Kingdom, had ended up in such a predicament when he had the upper hand. Who was that master who didn't leave his name? Neither the eldest prince of the Qi Kingdom nor the eldest prince of the Jing Kingdom could figure it out. The King of Shu's eyes were bloodshot as he smashed an inkstone on the table. The inkstone struck the forehead of a guard who was kneeling below. Blood immediately gushed out, but the guard did not dare to wipe it with his hands. Trash, all of you are trash. It's already been 3 days, and not a single clue has been found. The county magistrate of Yong County stood in the corner. Beside him, Jiang Zian lowered his head and said nothing. 3 days ago, the treasury of the King of Shu's mansion was ransacked by a group of bandits. They dug a secret tunnel from the outside all the way into the treasury. It was not discovered until the next day. At that time, the treasury was already empty. All the gold and silver treasures had been stolen. Not even a copper coin was left for the King of Shu. In other words, the King of Shu was probably the poorest prince in the Jing Kingdom now. If it wasn't for his identity, he would be worrying about what to eat for his next meal. In the past 3 days, the King of Shu had lost count of how many times he had lost his temper. However, 3 days had passed, and the entire Shuzhou had not been able to find out who the culprit was. Jiang Zian could understand the King of Shu. If the small box he had hidden under his bed had been stolen, he might have been even more furious than the King of Shu. After all, the entire Shuzhou was the King of Shu's fief. He could easily plunder it a few times and obtain countless taels of silver. Jiang Zian's private savings were accumulated little by little. Get out, all of you get out of here. If you can't get it back, don't come back to see me. The King of Shu overturned a few tables and chairs. Seeing this, the crowd immediately retreated. Walking out of the mansion, Jiang Zian looked at the county magistrate of Yong County and said, Fang Yong and the others left 3 days ago. Could it be? The county magistrate shook his head and said, impossible. Given his relationship with Her Highness, how could he do such a thing? Jiang Zian nodded and simply kept his mouth shut. The man named Fang Yong obviously had an unusual relationship with Her Highness. Every time they talked, he would drive them away. These things were not something they could handle. In addition, there was another thing that made him feel a myriad of emotions in his heart. In fact, he could no longer describe the specific feelings. That person was finally coming back. Jiang Zian sighed and looked in the direction of the city gate with an indescribable expression. After leaving Shuzhou and going south for another 100 miles, it was the chaotic place that people avoided. There were countless mountain bandits and bandits in the mountains. They often went down the mountains to loot caravans and disturb people's lives. Because of its special geographical location, both the Jing Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom adopted a laissez-faire attitude towards this place, which directly made the bandits there more rampant. Every night, if you looked down from the highest peak, you would find that the mountains were lit up with many lights, which showed that there were many bandits in the mountains. At this moment, a voice rang out from one of the thatched cottages on one of the mountains that was lit up with a faint light. Big brother, they outnumber us. Why don't we run away? The way down the mountain has been blocked by them. How can we run away? Tomorrow morning, we will fight to the death with them. At that time, we brothers will fight to the death for Big Brother. Big Brother just needs to escape and go back to live a good life with sister-in-law. Big Brother, please take care of our family. What are you talking about? I brought you out. How can I run away alone? Inside the thatched cottage, the candlelight was weak and swaying, but the inside of the cottage was not dark. Perhaps it was because there was a shiny bald head that reflected the light in all directions. Several bandits stepped forward and tried to persuade him, Big Brother, all of you, stop talking. The bald bandit waved his hand and said, since you've embarked on this path, this day will come sooner or later. Tomorrow, find an opportunity and run away if you can. Staying alive is more important than anything else. He looked at the endless swaying shadows of trees outside the window and sighed in his heart. He had thought that with his hot blood, he and his brothers could make a name for themselves here. He didn't expect that after only 2 months, they would be forced into a dead end. In this place where the strong preyed on the weak would either die or be swallowed up by the stronger ones. 2 months ago, they had just dispersed a small bandit group here, but they didn't expect that 2 months later, they would make a comeback, and there were already dozens of them. The few of them would never be able to defeat them. Now that their only escape route down the mountain had been blocked, it was impossible to escape. They could only fight with all their might. The bald bandit collected his thoughts and turned to look at the crowd. He said, "If anyone escapes tomorrow, remember to help me pass a message to my tigress." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, the door to the thatched cottage was kicked open. A figure that was as sturdy as the bald bandit blocked the door. A middle-aged woman dressed in coarse clothes stood there, looking at him and saying coldly, "If you have anything to say, say it to me personally now." The woman's appearance was ordinary, but her figure was extremely sturdy. However, the most eye-catching thing was not her sturdy figure, but the 2 mountain-splitting hammers in her hands, and her head that was also shiny without a single strand of hair. Especially after she walked into the thatched cottage, the entire room seemed to have become much brighter. "Why are you here?" The bald man was stunned, his face revealing a look of disbelief as he blurted out loudly. After speaking, he seemed to realize something and subconsciously retracted his head. His voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "Why are you here?" Chapter 725. The so-called mountain bandits were so weak that it was disappointing. Along the way, they had destroyed many of the bandits' nests, but there was not a single casualty. Not to mention death, there was not even a single injury. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to go back, he really wanted to stay here for 10 days or half a month and sweep through the surroundings. It was a virtue to pluck feathers when a goose passed. No matter how small a mosquito was, it was still meat. In any case, he had encountered nothing good. He would just treat it as getting rid of evil for the people. Fong revealed a look of anticipation and said, "Young master, why don't you think about it again? We've already come this far. It would be a pity if we don't do something big." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Why don't we go back and leave some people here for you?" "No, of course I want to go back with you." Fong shook his head. It was fine for him to stay here for a few more days, but he couldn't stand to stay here for a long time. "I'm going to the front to relieve myself." He turned over and got off the horse. When he walked forward, someone followed him. "Brother Fong, I'll go with you." Li Yi turned around and asked Yang Liuqing, "How long until we get to Shuzhou?" Yang Liuqing replied, 2 more days. Li Yi calculated. From Shuzhou to the capital, if they traveled day and night like before and went by the nearest waterway, it would take about a month. It would be a little slower to go back, but it would take about a month and a half to get there. This time, he didn't leave home for a long time, less than 4 months, but it happened to be at a time when he shouldn't have left. But fortunately, everything was still in time. Not far behind Li Yi, the sloppy old man threw a candy into his mouth, shook the reins, and took 2 steps forward. He looked at Yang Liuqing and asked, "How is that old guy Yang Wanli? He's not dead yet, right?" Yang Liuqing glanced at him and said lightly, "I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't know any Yang Wanli. This old man still recognizes Cloud Piercer. Back then, Yang Wanli used this move to fight me to a draw. But that was a matter of decades ago, you weren't even born yet." The sloppy old man smacked his lips and said, "For the sake of martial arts, that old guy even gave up the throne. He definitely wouldn't teach this move to an outsider. Could it be that you're his daughter?" After saying this, he shook his head and denied, "That's also impossible. That old guy can't find a woman. He only likes swords, and no woman would like him. Could it be that you're his disciple? And I've never heard of him accepting a disciple." Yang Liuqing glanced at him and asked, "Dare I ask if Senior has a family?" The sloppy old man's expression froze. He looked at her and said with dissatisfaction, "Little girl, what do you mean by that? This old man is different from that old guy. This old man didn't have a family because this old man doesn't want to have one. Back then, this old man was also handsome and elegant. If you don't believe me, you can go back and ask that old guy Yang Wanli. Yang Liuqing glanced at him and didn't say anything. The sloppy old man's expression froze again. What kind of attitude is that? Don't go, stop for this old man, run, I want to see where else you can run to. A man with a black cloth covering his eyes and a scar on his face looked at the people in front of him. He waved his hand and said, "Capture them for me. Capture them alive. I want to properly torture this baldy." Behind the knife-scarred man, dozens of figures slowly approached the front. Big brother. On the other side, seeing those people approaching, someone said in a low voice. The bald man said in a low voice, "We can only fight. Remember, staying alive is more important. Don't worry about me. If there's a chance, run." With that, he gripped the long sword in his hand tightly and took the lead to charge. The two bandits at the very front were first cut down by him. At the same time, two sharp lights went straight for his chest. Bang! Bang! After two muffled sounds, the two bandits were sent flying back. The bald woman held two giant hammers in her hands and stood beside the bald man. She said coldly, "If you want to touch my man, you have to ask the hammers in my hands first." The 10 or so bandits who were about to charge forward couldn't help but take 2 steps back. They watched as their 2 companions at their feet held their chests and vomited blood. They were actually frightened by the valiant bald woman. The scarred man rode on his horse and said angrily, "What are you still standing there for? Go. You people are afraid of a woman. All of you, go and capture them alive. We'll hold a banquet to celebrate tonight." The bandits received the order and suppressed the shock in their hearts. They raised the weapons in their hands and charged forward. Kill. Come on. So what if you have more people? I'm not afraid. Although there were less than 10 people on the bald man's side, their momentum was not inferior in the slightest, and they fearlessly faced the enemy head-on. The bald man obviously had some skills. Ordinary bandits would be cut down by him in a single exchange. The valiant woman was even more powerful. The 2 giant hammers in her hands were extremely agile. If one was hit head-on, he would immediately be unable to get up. Even a graze would be extremely painful. Surround them. Surround those 2 baldies. The scarred man commanded from his horse. Immediately, 2 groups of about a dozen bandits gathered together and surrounded the 2 of them. The rest of the bandits went to surround the others. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. Although the bald man and his wife were slightly better, they could only protect themselves when surrounded by enemies several times their strength. It was difficult for them to break through. Seeing that his brothers had been subdued, the bald man was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. When he tried to charge out with all his strength, a knife struck his leg and he immediately knelt on the ground. "My husband!" The valiant woman shouted and waved her hammers to force the crowd away. She guarded him by her side and gripped her hammers tightly. Her eyes coldly stared at the surroundings. The scarred man dismounted from his horse and came to the bald man's brothers who had been tied up. He waved his knife and said, "If you swing your hammers again, I will cut them once. I wonder how long these people can last." The valiant woman's expression finally changed. She looked down at the bald man and threw the 2 hammers to the ground. When the surrounding bandits saw this, they immediately put their weapons against his neck. The bald man lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry. I've implicated you." The valiant woman glared at him and said, "We're going to die. What's the point of saying this now?" Then she raised her head and looked at the scarred man. She said coldly, "If you want to kill me, then kill me. Give me a quick death. Don't talk nonsense. Give you a quick death?" The scarred man glanced at her and said, "In your dreams, men, tie them up for me first." 2 figures shuttled through the dense forest. A thin figure turned his head and asked, "Brother Fong, how did you train your strength?" "It's so scary." Fong patted him on the shoulder and said, "You'd better not think about it. With your body, you can't take it." Now that he thought of the days when he pushed the merry-go-round, he still felt his legs tremble. The young man looked at him and said with a smile, "Tell me. I was born with it. It's useless for you to train." Fong shook his head and said, "However, if you want to train harder, it's not impossible. When we go back this time, the amusement park in the brothel will be built soon. You can report to me then." The young man hurriedly nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Fong." Fong nodded and said, "Let's go to the front. I'm about to suffocate." The two of them passed through a thicket and stood on a low slope. They untied their pants and closed their eyes. Soon, the sound of water could be heard from below. When they were done and opened their eyes, they couldn't help but be stunned. Just below the low slope, several figures were tightly tied up. They were kneeling on the ground and looking at them in a daze. Looking down, there were dozens of figures in front of them. Each of them looked fierce. It was obvious that they were bandits in the mountain. Fong's body couldn't help but tremble. He pulled up his pants and looked down. "I'm just peeing. You guys continue." The scarred man wiped the water off his face and gritted his teeth. "Catch them and cut them off." Chapter 726. Cut. Fong looked down, then looked at the scarred man and said, "That's a bit too much." The scarred man suppressed his disgust and wiped his face with his sleeves, saying in a low voice, "They should be their accomplices. Capture them first." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits had already climbed up the slope. The youth beside Fong fastened his pants, then turned to look at him and asked, "Brother Fong, should we do it?" Fong looked around and nodded, "Let's do it." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozen or so bandits flew down the slope. While the scarred man was still in a daze, a black shadow had already pressed down from above and kicked him off his horse. His expression was twisted in pain, looking extremely hideous. He gritted his teeth and said, "Hurry up and attack." Without needing his order, the other bandits had no choice but to attack. That was because the tall and short, one muscular and one skinny man, had already come down the slope and were charging at the bandits. Although the skinny youth was thin and small, his leg skills were truly impressive. The bald man and the others were kneeling on the ground and couldn't see him move at all. It was also because he hadn't made a move at all. Just the indistinct leg shadows were enough to dazzle the eyes. The bandits that approached him all fell to the ground with footprints on their bodies. As for the burly man, he and the others looked in a certain direction. Even in a situation where he was tied up, he still revealed an extremely shocked expression. The burly man didn't have any weapons. He only relied on his iron fists and body. No matter how dense the sword shadows were, they couldn't touch him at all. It was hard to imagine that such a large person could be so nimble, and the bandits that came into contact with his fists all fell to the ground without exception. Just now, he had even used his body to send 3 bandits flying several meters away. This wasn't a human, he was clearly a ferocious beast. The skinny youth kicked another person and couldn't help but praise, "Brother Fong, you're amazing." Fong looked at him and said casually, "Kid, you're not bad either. You purposely didn't want to be on the heaven roll, right?" The skinny youth smiled and said, "The heaven roll is just a target. Even if I go up, I'll still be behind. It's better to be safe." The bald woman stared blankly at the two who were like tigers in a flock of sheep. She turned her head and asked, "Where did you recruit these people from?" The bald man was stunned and murmured, I don't know." The scarred man sat on the ground, his eyes wide open. In just a short while, only a dozen or so of his subordinates were still standing. From the looks of it, the remaining people wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Who the hell were these two fellows? His face revealed a look of horror. He looked left and right, and his eyes stopped on the bald man. "Stop." Old Fong and the skinny young man were fighting with all their might when a voice suddenly rang in their ears. Turning his head, he saw the scar-faced man place his knife on the neck of the bald man kneeling on the ground. He shouted, "You two, stop right now. If you don't stop, I'll..." Fong looked at him and asked, "What will you do?" The scar-faced man said sternly, "I will kill him." "Then go ahead and kill him." Fong kicked the last bandit to the ground and crossed his arms. It's not like I know him. The bald man's eyes widened. The scar-faced man's angry expression froze. He swallowed and said, I really will kill. If you want to kill me, then kill me. Fong looked at him and said, do you think I'll be threatened by you? Even if my head falls off, I'll still be a good man in 18 years. The bald man, seeing the monster walking toward him, the scar-faced man revealed a look of fear. He said with a trembling voice, Don't come over. Fong glanced at the thin young man. The thin young man nodded and turned into a blur. A flying rock flew through the air and knocked the knife out of the scar-faced man's hand. The knife and the rock collided, producing a crisp sound. The bald man's ears rang and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the knife was stuck in a tree. His back was drenched in cold sweat. That rock had almost brushed past his ear. If it had been just a little more, wouldn't his head have been split open? The scar-faced man's hand also split open from the recoil. He took a few steps back and actually ran without hesitation. The bald man looked left and right, a trace of relief appearing on his face. No matter who these two people were, they were finally saved today. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, he suddenly heard a cacophony of noises, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The bald man turned around and saw a cloud of dust rising from the road behind him, as well as the silhouettes within it. His face paled once more. After the sound of reining in a horse, a tall and strong man looked at the scar-faced man. He frowned and said, Scar, dozens of people can't beat these few. What do you do? The scar-faced man was stunned for a moment before a trace of joy appeared on his face. He said loudly, Master, we had already caught these people, but we don't know where these two troublesome people came from. That's why, the scar-faced man waved his hand and said, That's enough. This time, there's a big caravan passing through here. This is a big fat sheep. If you alarm me, be careful of your head. The scar-faced man was stunned. He didn't know which big caravan would dare to pass through here. Wasn't it stupid? However, he quickly recovered and pointed at the two people in front of him. He said, It's those two guys in front. Master, be careful. The thin man looked at the dense crowd in front of him and asked, Brother Fong, are we going to do it this time? Do it my ass. Fong glared at him. No matter how he looked at it, there were more than 200 people in front of him. If they really did it, the two of them would die of exhaustion. He quickly tore the ropes on the people who were tied up and said, What are you waiting for? Run. After the ropes were untied, the bald man immediately stood up. Ignoring his bleeding thigh, he cupped his fists and said, Thank you, hero, for saving us. Fong waved his hand and looked at the opposite side. He looked back and murmured, They should be here soon, right? What? The bald man asked doubtfully. As soon as the words left his mouth, he saw a carriage coming from the end of the road in front of him. Then, 2 carriages, 3 carriages, when more than 10 carriages, which were obviously loaded with goods, came from the front. The bald man was stunned on the spot. He finally understood why the notorious Jinshan tiger of this generation would come out personally. This caravan is really stupid. How stupid must they be to pass through the fringe so openly? Brothers, the fat sheep is here. The strong-looking man rode on his horse with an excited look on his face. He said loudly, After this, it will be enough for us to enjoy ourselves for a while. Keep your spirits up. Fong looked at the opposite side and clenched his fists. He turned back and said in a loud voice, Move faster, it's time to work. As soon as the man's voice faded, many figures came out from the caravan. They were armed with all kinds of weapons and walked towards them with ease. The bald man felt his mind go blank. Have these people gone mad? Or has the world changed? Since when did fat sheep dare to attack mountain bandits? Aren't they rushing to their deaths? Who do they think they are? Do they think they are as powerful as these two? When the strong-looking man saw this, he smiled instead of getting angry. He waved his hand and said, What are you waiting for? Go. When the two parties collided, the bald man's mouth was agape and he couldn't close it. His brothers and the bald woman were also dumbfounded. Like crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. What bullsh asterisk Tijan Shan Tiger? His name is so resounding, and he even said that he's the most powerful bandit leader of this generation. It's all bullsh asterisk T. In an instant, he was dragged down from his horse by one of the bandits. After 2 kicks, he lay motionless on the ground. The others were also like chickens and dogs that couldn't withstand a single blow. No, it wasn't that they were chickens and dogs, it was that they had encountered a group of monsters. One person, even if they could defeat one of them, it would still be fine. Have you ever seen someone catch a blade or an arrow empty-handed? Have you ever seen someone punch someone? Have you ever seen a horse fall to the ground with a single punch? Have you ever seen bandits rob merchant caravans? Have you ever seen a merchant caravan robbing a bandit? He had really seen it. When the burly man stepped on Jinshan Tiger's head and asked him where their lair was and what valuable items they had, the bald man felt as though the faith he had built up over a long period of time had crumbled. Who are the bandits and who are the fat sheep? Is this world still the same as the world I'm familiar with? Chapter 727. Robbing was something that could be left to others. If a grandmaster were to do it himself, it would seem rather degrading. The sloppy old man would at most stand at the side and watch from afar when they attacked. However, although these people looked average to him, there was no need to watch from the side when dealing with a few bandits. Therefore, the sloppy old man would always watch from the side. This time, he only glanced at them as usual. When he looked in a certain direction, his gaze paused for a moment, then he walked over and asked in surprise, "Why is it you again?" Senior. The bald bandit also recognized this senior whom he had met a few times. A hint of surprise flashed across his face, and he immediately bowed and spoke respectfully. The sloppy old man looked him up and down. Seeing his disheveled appearance, he said, "Why are you in such a sorry state again?" The bald bandit lowered his head awkwardly. After being hit 3 times in a row, no matter how thick-skinned he was, he could not maintain his composure. The bald woman raised her eyebrows and looked at the sloppy old man. She said angrily, "Who are you?" "My man, I need you to tell me." "Shut up." The bald bandit knew how terrifying this old man was. After glaring at her, he hurriedly turned to look at the sloppy old man and said with a smile, "My lowly wife has not seen the world," and spoke arrogantly. "Senior, please don't blame her, don't blame her." Seeing this, the few people behind the bald bandit widened their eyes. "Lowly? Who are you calling lowly? I haven't seen you for a few days and you've grown up." The bald woman pulled his ear and said fiercely, "Get over here." Seeing their big brother being dragged to the side, the bandits all had expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. Having escaped from death, their hearts that were hanging in suspense were finally at ease. Lee and Mississippi Lou walked over and looked at them. He said in surprise, "Why are you guys again?" The bandits looked awkward. Lee looked at the sloppy old man and asked, "Sue knows them too?" The sloppy old man nodded and said with a chuckle, "That little baldy is an interesting person." Lee looked at them and asked, "Tell me, why are you guys here?" Looking at the 3 people opposite them, the awkwardness on their faces deepened. After being a bandit for so long, he really didn't have the face to say it again. The other side. The bald woman let go of the bald man's ear and asked, "What's going on?" The bald man shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I've only met them twice before." The bald woman nodded and squatted down. She looked at his wound and asked, "Is your injury okay?" "Skin injury." The bald man shook his head and suddenly said, "Let's go back and live a good life from now on. We won't be bandits anymore." "Humph." The woman coldly snorted and said, "You don't want to inherit your father's dying wish? Are you satisfied if you don't make a name for yourself? Aren't you afraid that I'll continue beating you up when we get back?" The bald bandit rubbed his bald head and smiled awkwardly. "Living a good life is better than hanging my head on a belt. If you want to hit me, then hit me. But, Can you bear to hit me? Dead man. The bald woman glared at him and said, heal your wounds first. We'll talk about the future in the future. The bald man smiled foolishly. Li Yi didn't expect the bald bandit's road to be so tortuous. Nothing could happen more than 3 times, but he had been defeated 3 times in a row. His perseverance alone was enough to move people. It would be a waste of talent if such a person didn't become a bandit. Especially this kind of person who had principles, a bottom line, perseverance, and was willing to work hard. There weren't many of them. The Fringe was a place that he had set his sights on for a long time. But because of the long distance and his lack of understanding of the place, he didn't take any substantial action. This time, he just happened to pass by. Just as Fong said, it wasn't easy to come here. If he didn't do something, it would be a waste of an opportunity. This place was a treasure trove waiting to be mined. Seeing that the bandits were all wounded, Li Yi beckoned to Fong and said, call a few people over and help them tend to their wounds. Then, he saw the bald man limping over with a wound on his thigh that was still bleeding. Li Yi pointed at him and said, your wound needs to be tended to too. No need. The bald man shook his head. Before he could say the word, no need, the bald woman pinched him hard on his waist. Not long after, the bald man saw that someone was sewing his thigh with a needle and thread. He asked in surprise, why does this thing look like it's sewing a pocket? Will it work? The bald woman behind him smacked his head and said, shut up. You talk too much. It'll heal faster if you stitch it up. Li Yi was a little surprised. Although this bald man was unlucky, he was a real man. He didn't make a sound while stitching up his wound and even looked at it curiously. Li Yi didn't know if he was really good at enduring or just stupid. Li Yi looked at him and asked, you haven't given up after so many times. Do you really like being a bandit? The bald man raised his head and waved his hand. I quit. I wanted to be a bandit before, but I didn't know what it was like to be a bandit. Now it seems that I'd rather go back and live my life. It's better than being hacked to death. He really understood now. It wasn't just a caravan. Any random robber on the road could wipe them out. What was the point of being a bandit? His future was bleak. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at the bald man and said, young people should have dreams. Don't give up just because of a little setback. Nothing can be done in one go. Only by enduring hardship can you achieve success, the bald bandit sighed. Sigh, I'm not young anymore, middle-aged people should also struggle. As long as life is alive, the battle will not stop. One couldn't only care about oneself. One had to persuade others to do good. Li Yi looked at the bald bandit and asked, touch your conscience. Do you really want to give up? The bald man showed a hint of hesitation. After a moment, he sighed and said, we've all lived a hard life. I don't want to rob those poor people. As for the caravan, the bald man turned his head to look at the person lying on the ground not far away. He didn't say anything. What he wanted to say was that a caravan with brains wouldn't take this path. They needed to go down the mountain and rob further away. They also needed to steal business from other bandits. Brainless caravans, they couldn't compete with brainless caravans. Robbing the poor and robbing caravans is the lowest level of bandits. Li Yi patted his shoulder and said, robbing bandits is the king of bandits. Robbing bandits? The bald man looked at him with a dazed expression. Crash. Fong walked over with large strides and threw a large bag on the ground. He said, young master, these were found on the bodies of those bandits. I heard from them that there are even more good things in their stronghold. I've already sent people over. The bald man looked over and saw that the bag was filled with gold and silver. There was quite a lot of them. He was stunned once again. He thought about the scholar's words again. Gradually, a look of understanding appeared on his face. He licked his lips and a strange light shone from his eyes. Chapter 728. A soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. A tailor who didn't want to be a cook wasn't a good coachman. A bandit who didn't want to be the king of bandits wasn't a good baldy. The bald man really wanted to be a bandit. His grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather was a bandit, his grandfather's grandfather's grandfather was a bandit. It was too long ago to trace back that far. All in all, his ancestors had this fine tradition for generations. When it came to his father's generation, he had no choice but to turn over a new leaf because his territory was taken away. With such a glorious history, how could he be willing to be mediocre? That was why he wanted to recreate the glory of his ancestors. But he failed. Once. Twice. Thrice. As the saying goes, nothing can happen more than 3 times. After failing 3 times in a row, and it was a crushing defeat without any suspense, anyone would be disheartened. But he still couldn't accept it. The scholar in front of him had indeed opened a new window for him. However, a thought was just a thought. He needed to have the strength to match it. In the fringe, bandits slaughtered and annexed each other's territories. The winner would naturally obtain a bigger territory and accept everything from the loser. As for the loser, he could only choose to submit or die. He didn't want to choose either of these 2 paths. The bald man waved his hand and said, "Forget it. The fringe isn't that simple. I might lose my life one day." Li shook his head regretfully and said, "All right then. Fong, go ask around and see who is willing to stay here. The first batch of people who stay will be treated like a manager. They will be given a house and a wife after 3 years. They can stay or leave as they please." Fong patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, young master. Along the way, those fellows have been suppressing their evil thoughts. Some of them have mentioned it to me. I'll go and talk to them now." The bald man was stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" Li waved his hand and said, "Don't worry. Our people aren't familiar with this place. It's inconvenient for them to stay here. We need to find a guide who is familiar with this place. I think that mountain tremor tiger is a good choice. Go and ask him if he's willing." "Do something?" the bald man mumbled. After thinking for a while, he immediately understood what Lin Xing meant by "do something." They were going to do something big. These people were all like monsters. The mountain-shaking tiger was powerful enough and could be considered the largest bandit force in this area, but the other party only sent a dozen people to easily annihilate them. If he really had the help of these people, then whatever tiger of the mountain or soaring dragon of the heavens, they would all be bullsh***. If he was a tiger, he had better lie low. If he was a dragon, he had better coil up. When the time came, he would take over their territory, manpower, and influence. Oh my God, the light that had been extinguished in the bald man's eyes finally reignited. He looked at Li with bright eyes and asked seriously, "Mountain-shaking tiger is a two-faced man. He's not a good guy. I'm also very familiar with this place. What do you think of me?" "Let me think about it." Li looked at him, thought for a moment, and said, "I don't think mountain-shaking tiger is that kind of person. I have to talk to you about this." The bald man moved a stone and sat opposite him. He shook his head and said, "This mountain-shaking tiger was not a good guy before he became a bandit. He killed someone and was forced by the government, so he escaped here. He first joined a stockade, then poisoned the stockade chief and sat on the throne himself. Then, after a while, Fong came over and said, 'Young master, there are a total of 27 people who are willing to stay.'" This number surprised Li quite a bit. The capital was so prosperous and lively, and they had everything they wanted. There was no lack of leisure and entertainment. Yet, there were still so many people willing to stay in such a desolate place. What was wrong with them? What kind of people did Mississippi Lou recruit? When he saw what Mississippi Lou said to those people over there, Li understood that it was not what kind of people Mississippi Lou recruited, but what kind of leader they recognized. According to the bald macho man, the mountain-shaking tiger was really a bastard who had ulcers on the soles of his feet and pus on the top of his head. No one knew when he would stab someone in the back. Therefore, the job of tour guide and consultant naturally fell on the bald man who was fated with him. When he was thinking about some arrangements in his heart, a cold touch suddenly came to the tip of his nose. Li Yi reached out and touched it. His fingertips were slightly wet. Looking up at the sky, Fong walked over quickly and said, "Young master, look at the sky. It's going to rain. Let's go to the mountain-shaking tiger's territory to hide from the rain. We'll leave when the rain stops." Li Yi nodded. Fong walked over, waved his hand and said loudly, "It's raining. Everyone, hurry up and keep up." The rain in the mountains really came without warning. As soon as they walked to the mountain-shaking tiger's place, before they had time to sit down, the heavy rain poured down. Li Yi stood at the window and looked at it. It seemed that it would not stop for a while. The rain in the mountains comes and goes quickly. The rain should stop in an hour at most. However, it's raining so heavily that it should be difficult to walk later. The bald man was always trying to show his value. At this moment, he stood at the door and showed that he knew the weather in the mountains very well. It turned out that this bald man might not be a good mountain bandit, but he was a good weather forecaster. After more than half an hour, the rain really stopped. Although the rain was not light, it did not last long. The road was only slightly muddy. Fong came over and asked, "Young master, are we leaving?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's stay here for the night and leave tomorrow." The muddy road was only one of the reasons. Since he had decided to do something here, of course, he had to arrange the route and plan for the future. After all, he was far away in the capital. Everything here in the future still depended on them. Li Yi looked at Fong and said, "Call Rui over." There were many things to plan. The first thing was how to deal with mountain-shaking tiger and the others. These vicious bandits should either be eliminated for the sake of the people and put an end to their troubles, or they should be crippled of their martial arts and sent to build roads, bridges, and houses. As for the other small fries, they could not do the same. Of course, the roads still needed to be paved. First, they should be tempered to wear down their character. Then, they should be disorganized and reorganized. Those people could be trained to be the new base. Big fish preys on small fish preys on shrimps. The weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of the fringe. Today's boss might not be tomorrow's boss. Tomorrow's boss might be hacked to death in the evening. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, not many people would be willing to become bandits. Although they couldn't be completely trusted, they didn't need to be trusted to build a house or to be a lackey who could fight wherever he wanted. Among the small leaders, he could take a white rabbit creamy candy pill to control them. Every 3 months, he would take a hawthorn pill to detoxify the poison. After that, he could let them control their subordinates. At the very least, there was no lack of poison experts among those who roamed the Jianghu. It was not impossible to consider using their real skills. However, this kind of method was a little too lowly. If it really came to that, it would be better to let them mine and build roads. There were some more detailed things that he had to discuss with Mississippi Lu. The sky gradually darkened. The candlelight in the room flickered. A map spread on the table gradually became more and more marks. First, nibble away at the small forces. As for the new recruits, we need to train them. We need a base that is easy to defend and hard to attack. This place definitely won't do. Look here, if we go deeper, it won't be as simple as bandits. Let's avoid them for now. From here, and here, the whispers in the room continued until late at night. Li Yi put down his pen. Mississippi Lu walked to his bed and crawled into his newly made quilt. Sleep early, Li Yi nodded habitually. After a moment of daze, he suddenly realized that he was no longer in Feng province. She was now sleeping on his bedding. Li Yi stood by the table and began to think. Where should he sleep tonight? The map on the table was still spread out. It was filled with marks like O or X. The bulging marks were mountains, the thicker lines were rivers, and the thinner lines were roads. At this time, on a muddy mountain road, a group of more than 100 people was advancing with difficulty. Splash! The young man stepped into the quagmire, and his face darkened once more. He looked down at the raging river below and could not help but curse angrily. Damn rain, damn Li. Chapter 729. As a matter of fact, Li didn't sleep at all last night. His decision to intervene in the Fringe's affairs wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This idea had been in his mind since a year ago, or perhaps even longer. After all, in today's society, there was no such thing as a carefree life. He no longer had one or two people standing behind him. No matter what kind of trouble he might encounter in the future, he had to leave at least 17 or 18 escape routes for himself. He spent the entire night making the arrangements for the Fringe's future as detailed as possible. Although he couldn't say that he covered every single detail, he wouldn't overlook the general direction. He also had to make arrangements for the people who would stay behind in the Fringe one by one. He had to make the arrangements as detailed as possible to avoid future problems. This wasn't an easy task. It was physically and mentally taxing. When the oil lamp on the table gave its last spark and extinguished its flame, Li raised his head and saw that the sky was almost bright. You didn't sleep at all last night? Li turned around and saw Mississippi Lu getting off the bed and walking towards him with a coat draped over her shoulders. She still has the cheek to ask me such a question. Li covered his mouth and yawned. A wave of fatigue washed over him. You're awake. I'm going to take a nap. He waved his hand, walked over, took off his shoes and coat, and crawled into bed. It's been a long time since I've smelled a fragrance from my bed. It's a completely different scent from Rui's. More importantly, this bed is still warm. For some reason, the term bed warming maid suddenly popped up in his mind. Then, after that, he lost consciousness. Mississippi Lu turned around and walked to the table. She was startled when she saw the things on the table. She heard even breathing sounds coming from the bed. She turned around and looked again. She didn't look away for a long time. Young master, are you awake? After an unknown period of time, a voice came from outside the door. She collected her thoughts and put on her clothes. After a simple wash, she opened the door. We haven't seen each other for a few months, and the son-in-law has become lazy. It's already so late, and he's still not up. Fong stood at the door and muttered softly. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a creaking sound behind him. Goo. Fong turned around and swallowed his words. I'm sorry, second miss, I went the wrong way. He quickly walked to the side, and after looking left and right, a puzzled look appeared on his face. That's right, Mississippi Lu walked out of the door, then turned around and said, Don't disturb him. Let him sleep a little longer. Fong looked into the room. When he saw a figure lying on the bed, his eyes immediately widened. At this moment, his heart received an unprecedented impact. He needed to think carefully about what had happened during the few months when the son-in-law and second miss were away. Young miss, son-in-law, second miss. His mind was in a mess, even more so than every time he passed by Willow Lane. The weather in the mountains was indeed unpredictable. It had rained heavily yesterday, and the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be pressing down. When Li woke up, he washed up and walked out. The warm breeze was warm, and the sun was shining brightly above his head. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The bald bandit said that there was a flash flood in a nearby stream, which was a common occurrence in the mountains. Li did not intend to delay. After 2 hours, he informed them of the strategic plans for the next 2 years and planned to set off today. When he left, he naturally left behind a sum of money. Regardless of whether it was to purchase rations or to recruit soldiers, they would need to spend a lot of money. Li had never been stingy when it came to investments with great potential. This time around, if it wasn't for the generosity of the Bing region's officials, he would have been a little short on money. When the bald bandit saw those chests, his eyes widened. After living for so long, this was the first time he had seen so much money. He subconsciously thought that they had robbed this along the way, and he no longer had any doubts about something. Robbing caravans was just a low-level bandit. Robbing bandits was the true bandit of bandits. As expected, they had really gone down the wrong path in the past. What happened next depended on them. For now, this was all the help Li Yi could provide them. He did not know if it was because he did not make Fang stay, but Li Yi felt that the way Fang looked at him today was very strange. His gaze was rich with emotions, which was extremely rare. However, no matter how strange it was, he did not intend to leave this fellow here. After all, no one but Fang himself could withstand the power of his wife. The bald bandit pointed to the rushing flood and said, "Follow this river. If everything goes well, we can reach Shu province in 3 to 5 days." Due to the heavy rain yesterday, the trickling stream had now turned into a muddy torrent. It was quite powerful. Fortunately, mountain torrents often broke out here. The river was so wide that it couldn't reach the shore, and the water couldn't reach the mountain path on one side. "Let's go." After Li Yi cleared his throat and gave the order to set off, the creaking of the carriage came from behind. At a bend in the mountain path ahead, the man's surnamed Fang's clothes were still wet and stuck to his body, making him feel especially uncomfortable. His shoes and socks were also wet, and there was even water in his boots. His eyes were bloodshot, and the depression and anger in his heart had almost reached the limit. The nearly 100 figures around him were in the same situation. Ever since they entered the mountains, they had already encountered several groups of bandits. They all treated them as caravans. Although they were all weak bandits, they still brought them a lot of trouble and completely messed up their journey. The sudden rain yesterday had caught them unprepared, and they did not even have time to set up camp. Although they had rested for a night, the mountain was wet and their clothes were still wet. In such a state, the atmosphere was extremely oppressive as they walked on the bumpy mountain path. Damn it, Li Yi, don't let me meet you again." As he cursed angrily, the group of people had already reached a bend in the mountain path. The carriage in front of them suddenly stopped. The youth named Fang looked up and saw that 1,000 feet away, the figure in front of them, as well as the creaking sound of the carriage, was very, very close. "Protector, there seems to be a caravan in front." A hint of impatience appeared on the man's surnamed Fang's face. Although he did not know which caravan dared to pass through here, since he had encountered them, there was no reason for him to let them go. He waved his hand and was about to speak when a figure suddenly flew out from the carriage. The middle-aged Taoist nun's face was slightly pale, and her eyes were filled with shock and uncertainty as she looked ahead. There really are caravans passing through this place," Li Yi said in astonishment as he looked at the horse carriage and the silhouette of the people not far away from him. However, the surprise on his face quickly disappeared. Looking at the figures in blue and yellow, he dismounted and muttered, "It can't be." It was unknown when the sloppy old man had appeared beside him. After throwing a piece of candy into his mouth, he fiercely chewed and slowly said, "Yes." Old Taoist Yuan appeared on his other side. Looking at the figure in front, he said, "So it's her." Chapter 730. Good will be rewarded, evil will be punished. It's not that there will be no retribution, it's just that the time has not yet come. Good and evil will always be rewarded, the heavenly Tao reincarnates. If you don't believe it, look up, who will the heavens spare? Li Yi had always believed in these two sentences, and he unswervingly followed them by example. He helped the elderly cross the road, picked up money and handed it to the authorities. Although he had not done any of these things, he had occasionally gone to Willow Lane to help 2 weak women carry water and cook. Therefore, he had always thought that his encounter with Taoist nun was a result of God's glaucoma. Now God's glaucoma had been cured. In any case, he was a transmigrator, and transmigrators were rare. Who knows, he might be used as a model by some discerning author in the future, and become the protagonist of a novel. With the protagonist's halo on his head, he would walk to the peak of his life, and in the end, he would rule the world, embrace beauties, and live a shameless life. As a protagonist, how could he be bullied? Li Yi now knew that the process was full of twists and turns, but the result was already set in stone. All the twists and turns were waiting for him. Li Yi looked left and right and said, "Elder Yuan, Su, this time, I'll leave it to you. Taoist priests and Taoist nuns, none of them are good. Su nodded strangely, and said, "Leave that damned Taoist nun to me." The middle-aged Taoist priest glanced at him, but did not say anything. Li Yi turned around, pointed to the front, and said, "Those people are not simple, everyone be careful." Along the way, they were already familiar with this kind of thing, and did not even need to explain or say much. The crowd behind them had already started moving. In front, looking at the crowd pressing toward them, as well as the two extremely dangerous figures in front of them, Taoist Nun's face finally darkened. "Retreat." As soon as her voice fell, she had already disappeared. That thing, the youth surnamed Fong had already realized something, and his expression changed. He looked ahead, then looked at the rushing torrent below, and waved his hand to the back, gritted his teeth, and jumped down. He was already clear about the strength of those people. This time, he had chosen this path to avoid them, but who would have thought, the man with the surname Fong's actions were like throwing a stone into the surging muddy water, instantly disappearing without a trace. Li Yi looked at the yellow-clothed and blue-clothed people jumping into the mountain torrent like dumplings. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time, he sighed and murmured, "They are really cruel to themselves." Su and Taoist Yuan went after the Taoist nun. As for the rest of the people, seeing that the situation was not good, they all jumped into the water and disappeared in an instant. Seeing that they did not hesitate at all, Li Yi strongly suspected that the followers of the holy religion had really learned some secret techniques like the water escape technique. As the second most important person in the cult, he had never heard of something that even the ordinary members of the cult knew. The Taoist nun was so cunning. She actually hid it from him. In the end, there were still some people who did not react in time. Before they could use the water escape technique, their acupuncture points were sealed. There were about a dozen people. Naturally, these people could not jump into the water. The water was vast and mighty, and it was mixed with sand and stones. Even if the top experts jumped in, their lives would be in the hands of the heavens. If they did not know the water escape technique, they could only rely on the protection of the goddess. However, their goddess probably did not have the time to protect them now, because she could not even protect herself. As Li Yi walked over, Fong ran over excitedly and said excitedly, young master, we are rich." He opened a few big boxes in a row. Even Li Yi could not help but be stunned when he saw the contents of the boxes. Gold and silver were the lowest grade here. All kinds of treasures, calligraphy, and paintings were piled up in the boxes like sundries. If they were all exchanged for silver, it would probably be an extremely terrifying number. They are actually so rich? This time, Li Yi was really a little shocked. The Taoist nun's base was in the Qi kingdom. This trip back from the Jing kingdom was actually able to gather so many treasures. Just how rich was their cult's foundation? Damn it, it was really too tempting. Li Yi still felt a little pained when he left the starting capital for the bald bandit and the others. But this time, he did not dare to say that he would earn back tens of times the amount. Li Yi walked over and stopped in front of a man in yellow. He asked, "Speak, what are you doing here?" The man snorted coldly. "You betrayed the goddess. You will not have a good ending." These followers were stubborn. Li Yi had already experienced it. He did not know what method the Taoist nun had used to brainwash them so successfully. Fong picked him up with one hand and said, "Young master, wait for me for a while." Having said that, he walked towards a corner. After a while, he came back and said, "Young master, I've asked him. He said that they were returning to the Qi kingdom this time. In order to avoid bumping into us, they took this path. This was fate. Everything was predestined. Although these treasures could not make up for what the Taoist nun had done to him, they could at least repay what they could. They could barely be considered compensation for the psychological damage. As for the physical body, they could talk about the physical body when there was a chance in the future. Fong hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, there's one more thing." "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. Fong pointed at the boxes and said in a low voice, "He said that these treasures were stolen from the king of Shu's treasury. This was the true meaning of fate." Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked at Fong in confusion and asked, "What did you say just now?" Fong was stunned. He shook his head and said, "Did I say anything just now?" "No. You really didn't." Li Yi was very pleased. After not seeing each other for a long time, Fong had finally become a little more understanding. Fong pointed at the men in yellow and asked, "Young master, what should we do with these people?" In fact, it was useless to keep these people. In the holy religion, the status and strength could be seen from the clothes they wore. The purple emissaries, blue emissaries, yellow emissaries, and then ordinary believers. The strength of these men in yellow was not high. Otherwise, they would not have been subdued without any time to react. These people were different from the mountain bandits. They were very stubborn and could not be subdued for their own use. It was better to let them invest in basic construction. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Send them to the bald man. They know what to do." Su came back very soon. He did not look very good. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and said, "If a guru wants to escape, it is very difficult to stop her. Coincidentally, she is very good at lightness skills, so we did not catch up with her." Li Yi shook his head, indicating that he did not care. Although he still felt a little regretful, he also knew that gurus were not that simple. He was mentally prepared and would not be too disappointed. Thinking of something, he looked at the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Taoist Master Yuan, do you know her?" The middle-aged Taoist nodded and said, "I thought she would disappear without a trace. I did not expect that in just a short 20 years, she has grown to such an extent. Taoist Master Yuan, is this Taoist nun related to you?" The slovenly old man glanced at him and asked with a frown, "You are so old and have one foot in the coffin. Could it be?" The middle-aged Taoist glanced at the slovenly old man and ignored him. He said slowly, "When I saw her, she was about the same age as Miss Lu. It was during the transition between the old and the new dynasties. Because the Fong family was involved in the factional struggle in the court, they were exterminated. Now that more than 20 years have passed, the hatred in her heart has not disappeared." He looked in a certain direction and sighed, "She is also a pitiful person." Chapter 731. The grudge between the Taoist nun and the old emperor was deep. Li Yi had met them several times along the way. Although he did not know the ins and outs of the whole matter, he knew a little. Now he understood that there was more than just a grudge between them. The hatred of the extermination of the family was as deep as the sea. Although the old emperor had not ascended to the throne at that time, it was not wrong to put the blame on the old Li family. Killing an entire family, and they were not allowed to rebel? Now that he thought about it, it had not been easy for the Taoist nun. Traveling to other countries and enduring humiliation for more than 20 years, not only did his martial arts cultivation reach Zhongshe realm, he even managed to develop such a huge faction. If this were to be placed in a novel or drama, it would definitely be used as a revenge plot of the protagonist, and there would be no need for any changes at all. His conscience told him that if this had happened to him, he would have taken even more extreme measures. However, understanding was one thing, but he could not forgive what the Taoist nun had done. The one who killed her family was the old emperor's father. Of course, there was no way to take revenge. It was too difficult to take revenge on the old emperor. Logically speaking, the most suitable target for her to kill, torture, and tie up should be the king of Shu. What did it have to do with him? Sympathy was sympathy, but he still had to repay what he owed. Although it was a pity that he did not catch the Taoist nun, he could not force her. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and cover these things. Let's go quickly. We have to find a place to stay before it gets dark." Night gradually fell. Somewhere in the open space in the mountains, simple tents had been set up. Lights shone from the tents. Outside the tents, there was a roaring bonfire. Toasts were exchanged in the surroundings, and the deer legs above the fire were dripping with fat, making a sizzling sound. The roars of all kinds of beasts came from the mountains, but it did not affect this small carnival. Even a certain man sitting by the fire was still hesitating in his heart. How should he eat the bear that he had just hunted back? Dozens of miles away, a torrent of sand rolled away. The middle-aged Taoist nun carried a figure away from the riverbank and slowly walked deeper into the mountains. In the endless darkness, the shadows of the trees swayed like ferocious beasts choosing people to devour. There were also subtle sounds coming from it. There's actually someone. It's a Taoist nun. A Taoist nun is also passable. Several figures walked out of the darkness and chased after them. Shu Prefecture, King Shu's mansion. The king of Shu had become haggard in recent days. The servants in the residence could not relax, fearing that they would be scolded or punished by the king of Shu. Your Highness, there's still no news. The king of Shu slumped on his seat. Someone came in from outside and said respectfully. The king of Shu looked up at him and asked, "Are you sure they are not in the Qi kingdom? We didn't find anything along the way." The king of Shu was slightly excited. Could it be that they met with an accident? The silver and treasures lost in the treasury might not be found this time, but if something happened to Li Yi and the others, such as choking to death while eating, choking to death while drinking water, or being crushed to death by a meteorite while walking, it would be good news for him. It could slightly dispel the depression in his heart and relieve his mood. At the thought of this possibility, even his face became slightly ruddy. It was also at this time that carriages drove into the city gate of Yong County. The guards at the city gate were about to go forward to check, but when they caught a glimpse of the sign shown by one of the carriages, their expressions changed and they immediately gave way respectfully. This was not the first time he had seen such a sign. The first time he saw it, it was because a general in the city had a conflict with those people. Now, when they were on duty every day, they would pass by the grave of that general. After the carriages entered the city gate, at the gate, there were immediately people running wildly toward the yamen. The streets of Yong County looked a little familiar to Li Yi. Not far away, the new Ru family inn had been built, but it had not opened for business yet. Standing at the entrance of the inn, Li Yi looked around. His surroundings had not changed much in the past few months, but his mood and situation were completely different from before and after. They had been traveling for nearly 10 days. Even if they were martial arts masters, they could not help but feel tired. After arriving in Shuzhou, everything was not so urgent. They could have a good sleep and recharge their energy. Tomorrow morning, they would officially set foot on the road home. Not long after he settled down, someone came in to report that the county magistrate of Yong County had arrived. The county magistrate did not come alone. Accompanying him were all the officials in the county government. Li Yi did not see Jiang Zian in the crowd, but he did not care. That brother Jiang should be feeling very bad at this time. All the officials in Yong County came to express their condolences, but they did not see the king of Shu. He had already arrived in Shuzhou. With the friendship between the two of them, why did the king of Shu not even show his face? Although the king of Shu might not be in a very good mood after his treasury was stolen, there was an old saying that a moment of spring night was worth 1,000 taels of gold. 1,000 taels of gold could be spent, but it would come back. Silver could be earned again if it was gone. Money was just a worldly possession. It was not too much to treat the king of Shu to a meal, was it? A stingy person would naturally not be able to achieve great things. The king of Shu would definitely not be able to achieve great things in the future. When he took a comfortable bath and lay on the bed for the first time in a long time, a satisfied expression appeared on his face. In the king of Shu's mansion, the young king of Shu's face was extremely gloomy. They are back? Your Highness, they have just arrived in Yong County. The king of Shu paced in the hall. After a while, someone came forward to report that the people from the intelligence office wanted to see him. No. Just say that I am not feeling well and will not see anyone. The king of Shu waved his hand impatiently and said, You can report to I when they have left. Although he wanted to cut someone into 1,000 pieces, he could not make the decision in Shuzhou at this moment. Even if he really met them, he would feel even more depressed. Out of sight, out of mind. He simply did not even want to see the people from the intelligence office. In the county government of Yong County. The county magistrate of Yong County waved his hand and called a yamen runner over. He asked, Lord Jiang just said that he was not feeling well. Is he feeling better now? The yamen runner shook his head and said, Not yet. Lord Jiang has been resting in his room. The county magistrate knocked on the door and walked into a room. He saw Jiang Zian lying on the bed with a towel over his forehead and his face slightly pale. He asked with concern, Lord Jiang, how are you feeling? Do you need a doctor to come over? Jiang Zian shook his head with difficulty and said in a low voice, I am fine. I just reviewed a few cases last night. Maybe I caught a cold at that time. I will be fine after a few days of rest. The county magistrate sighed and said, Lord Jiang is a conscientious person. He is a role model for us, Jiang Zian said politely, it is my duty. It is what I should do. If it were not for the fact that he was in a hurry to rush back to the capital, Li Yi would definitely stay in Shuzhou for a few more days to catch up with the king of Shu and get to know him better. But other than the necessary rest, he really did not want to waste any time outside. Early the next morning, he and Mississippi Lu packed lightly and left the city on a few fast horses with Fong, the sloppy old man, and Taoist Yuan by their side. As for the people behind them, Yang Liuqing was in charge, so it was fine to go back slowly. When the people of Yong County began their busy day, somewhere far away from Yong County, Li Yi tightened the reins of his horse and whipped it again. Behind him was a trail of smoke and dust. Chapter 732. Did he really leave? Hearing the servant's report, the king of Shu asked again with uncertainty. The servant immediately replied, It's certain. I saw them leave the city early in the morning. Hearing this, the king of Shu was slightly relieved. Then he was stunned and a trace of anger flashed across his face. The reason for his relief was that the god of plagues had left. The people of the Secret Intelligence Office would naturally leave Shuzhou, and he would regain his absolute control over Shuzhou. As for the reason for his anger, it was because the first prince was relieved because of the departure of an insignificant county marquis. At this moment, the contradiction and entanglement in his heart were really not worth mentioning to others. After changing his expression for a while, he waved his hand to summon a trusted subordinate and gave him a letter, saying, Send this letter to the Cui family. The treasury had been robbed clean, and there was no way to make money for the time being. If they did not ask for help, the hundreds of people in the mansion of the king of Shu would have no food to eat. The county magistrate of Yong County had learned that County Marquis Li had left Yong County early in the morning. At noon, the people of the Secret Intelligence Office also withdrew from the county government office. Finally gone, he murmured with a long sigh. All the officials of the Jing Kingdom were afraid of the Secret Intelligence Office. In particular, he had nightmares for several days after seeing the general's head fall to the ground. During the days when their people stayed in the county government office, he couldn't even sleep well. After sending away the god of plagues, it was time to celebrate today. Looking up, he saw the lieutenant of the River County coming out of the room with a ruddy face. The county magistrate looked at him and said, Lord Jiang, you caught a cold. You'd better rest more. Jiang Zian waved his hand and said, Thank you for your concern. Zian is fine now. Seeing the lieutenant of the River County walking out in high spirits, he didn't look as seriously ill as yesterday. The county magistrate touched his bulging belly and couldn't help sighing. It's good to be young. It was already late June, probably the hottest time of the year. A year ago, because of the unbearable heat in the capital, many people lost their lives. Later on, it became known as the worst summer in decades. This situation, in the summer of this year, had greatly improved. Firstly, it was raining a lot this year, so most of the weather was cool and not too hot. Secondly, even if it was really unbearably hot, they could spend a few copper coins and hide in the brothel for a whole day. The cool breeze from the ice mirror was so comfortable that it could make people moan. Other than the fact that the weather was cooler than usual, for the commoners of the capital, this was a normal summer. The current situation was generally stable. Although there were disagreements with Qi and Zhao, it was limited to some minor skirmishes. Under the deterrence of Tian Fa, a larger-scale war had not broken out yet. As for the affairs of the imperial court, it was not something that ordinary people could worry about. They only heard that the current emperor was ill and the imperial court had not been convened for 2 months. Fortunately, there were 2 prime ministers who were conscientious and conscientious. Everything in the country was running in an orderly manner as usual. Of course, there were also some things that were different from the past. From time to time, there would be new plays in the brothel, which were talked about enthusiastically by the common people. Nowadays, the brothel had become a place for ordinary people to spend their leisure time. More and more people had developed the habit of going there to listen to plays and music after a hard day's work to relax. Moreover, there was the policy that was closely related to them. Women were only allowed to marry after the age of 16. This rule had been written into the law. Not only in the capital, but also in the neighboring counties, it had begun to be implemented. No one would worry about the waste of food if their daughters were raised at home for 3 years. They were eager to have more daughters, because as long as they reached the age of 13, they could be sent to the eldest princess's workshop. A month's salary would be more than enough to feed the whole family. The commoners remembered the princess's kindness, and the officials and nobles did not dare to look down on her. The women's college had been open for more than a few months. Many of the girls in their families who were of the right age were studying there. On the opening day of the women's college, His Majesty and Her Majesty the Empress personally showed up and said some encouraging words, which directly expressed the royal family's attitude. The officials and nobles in the capital also understood that from now on, the girls who graduated from the women's college would be different from those ordinary girls. Compared with the women's college, the Academy of Sciences was a little less famous, because it did not recruit students from the public. Everyone in the Academy of Sciences was personally selected by the dean, Li Xian. This was also the most mysterious place in the 3 academies, which could be seen from the imperial guards who patrolled the area. Of course, the one that shone the brightest was the Mathematics College, which was in the same place as the other 2 colleges. A few months ago, the account investigation made them shine in the capital. For the first time, the officials of the court saw the horror of mathematics. In the following months, they solved countless problems for the court. The ministers of the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Revenue, and the Ministry of War almost fought over some top students in the Mathematics College. His Royal Highness Prince Jean, who had always been regarded as a naughty child by the officials, was like a dazzling star. In a very short period of time, he rose rapidly. When the dean was not around, he temporarily took over the position of dean and managed the academy in good order. Many times, people would selectively ignore that he was just a child who had just turned 11. The capital seemed to be the capital of the past, and there was no earth-shaking change because of the absence of someone. The playboys were still playboys, but they would no longer be escorted to the palace gate and beaten with a wooden plank. The young princes lived safely in the palace and would not be beaten in front of the civil and military officials. The rumor that the king of Shu was the reincarnation of a real dragon and could lead the Jing kingdom to prosperity and power had long disappeared, and was not as rampant as before. However, no matter whether it was the common people or the nobles, at some point in time, some strange thoughts would arise in the heart. The capital seemed to be too peaceful. Compared to a few months ago, it was so peaceful that people were not used to it. When he stood at the city gate again and saw the 2 words, capital, Li Yi felt an unprecedented sense of familiarity in his heart. County Marquis Li, follow me back to the palace to report. The old Taoist looked at him and said softly, don't let His Majesty wait too long. Report what? We'll talk about it when we have time. Li Yi waved his hand and shook the reins. He turned around and ran along the familiar path. The sloppy old man glanced at the middle-aged Taoist and quickly followed. Taoist priest Yuan, this. A general of the intelligence division looked at the middle-aged Taoist with a troubled expression. I've already sent someone to the palace to report to His Majesty. If this, the middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and said, report as it is. In a small courtyard, a thin figure sat by a stone table. She held her chin with both hands and murmured, it's been 4 months and 9 days. Son-in-law and second miss had been gone for 4 months and 9 days. To her, this was a very, very long time, so long that she could not imagine it in the past. Fortunately, she received news some time ago that they would be back soon. However, They did not say when they would be back, so she could not even count. She maintained this posture, her head swaying left and right. At a certain moment, her eyes were suddenly covered by someone from behind. A familiar voice came from behind. "Guess who I am?" The little servant girl seemed to be thinner than before. Her face was not as round as before. He still liked Xiao Huan, who had an oval face and some baby fat. In the following days, he must feed her back. Then he felt a warm feeling on his palm. It was also a little wet. Then he heard the little servant girl's choked voice. "Son-in-law." She suddenly turned around and hugged Li Yi tightly. She used all her strength and Li Yi's chest was soon wet. The little servant girl was indeed made of water. Li Yi gently patted her head. When he turned around, a figure walked out of the room. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to freeze for a moment. Li Yi looked at the beautiful woman who was smiling at him and said softly, "I'm back." Chapter 733. The closer they got to the capital, the stronger Li Yi's desire to return home became. They changed horses over and over again, almost to the point of traveling day and night. As a result, even the messenger from the secret intelligence office wasn't much faster than them. At this moment, the news of his return to the capital should have just reached the imperial palace. They hadn't seen each other for nearly 5 months, but Rui hadn't changed much. She was just a little pregnant. Li Yi walked over and hugged her gently. Then, he bent over and put his ear on her belly. He seemed to be able to feel the rhythm of another breath of life. He had lived 2 lives and experienced many things, but this was the first time he had experienced such a feeling. Rui reached out and touched his face. She said softly, "Husband." Both of them seemed to have thousands of words in their hearts, but when they spoke, they were only a few simple words or a form of address. However, the emotions they wanted to express were all contained in them. The young servant girl held the second young mistress's hand and looked at the 2 figures at the door. There was an almost dazed smile on her face, and her entire heart was filled with joy. How nice, she thought to herself. Even if what Li Yi wanted to do the most at this moment was to hold Rui's hand, even if he didn't say anything and just looked at her, the news of his return had already spread. When the matriarch walked in while wiping away her tears, he still had to go over and comfort her. "It's good that you're back, it's good that you're back." The matriarch of the Li family had been through a lot and quickly calmed down. She patted his hand and said, "It's good that you're back." Then, as if she had thought of something, she walked over and held Rui's hand. She said, "Now you can be at ease. Let's move to the city in the next few months so that we can take care of each other." Seeing that the matriarch was looking at him with a strange expression after wiping away her tears, Li Yi was startled and quickly realized what she meant. Was she guarding against him? No matter how much of a beast he wasn't that much of a beast. Naturally, he couldn't let Rui leave, but it was necessary for them to move to the city. The main reason was that it was convenient. The capital city was not just noisy. She bought a garden with verdant hills and clear waters so that she could rest in peace and nurture the fetus. It was also convenient for the whole family to live there. After sending off the old madam with great difficulty, Xiao Huan had already run over and asked about what had happened in the past few months. Rui sat at the side and listened. Thus, the story unfolded with a heroine with a sword fighting the evil Taoist nun and rescuing the hero. In a small courtyard at the side, the sloppy old man looked at the old man lying on the rocking chair and said respectfully, "Senior, I've brought him back." The antidote. The old man casually tossed a porcelain bottle over, and the sloppy old man revealed an excited expression. He impatiently opened the bottle and swallowed the pill inside. Grind it into powder and add it to the bathtub. Soak it in the bathtub for 2 hours and the poison will be detoxified. The old man's voice sounded slowly. The joy on the sloppy old man's face froze. After being stunned for a moment, his face instantly turned pale. As his expression changed drastically, he slapped his back and spat out the pill. Seeing the stain on the ground, although his stomach churned, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. On the rocking chair, the old man stretched and said, "If it's taken orally, it's also possible. The effect will be better. The sloppy old man's expression froze again. After a moment, he lowered his head to look at the ground. When Changda's stiff and expressionless old face came into Li Yi's sight, he knew that he would have to wait until nightfall to tell Xiao Huan and Rui how he and Lu Er Xiaojie were on the street, with 2 watermelon knives in their hands, facing dozens of villains, and slaughtered their way in and out. His Majesty summons you. Although Changda's voice was cold, there was a different expression on his face. Let's go, the old emperor could not be avoided. Moreover, Li Yi also planned to enter the palace to see his Yongning, Shaoning, and the eldest princess. After such a long time, did they miss him? When he walked out of the door, he saw the sloppy old man coming out from another yard and following him. Changda's eyes narrowed and he looked at him a few more times. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Su, do you have something to do? The sloppy old man nodded and said, I'm going out to buy something. Let's go together. Li Yi looked at him and said, what do you want to buy? I'll bring it for you when I come back. The sloppy old man looked back and said, no need. Let's go together. Although Lao Chang was there and nothing would go wrong on the way this time, and Lao Chang could send him back at the worst, it was not a bad thing to have another guru by his side. If Lao Chang wanted to follow him, then let him follow. Along the way, they did not notice any changes in the capital. The sloppy old man got off the car at the gate of the palace. After a few months, Li Yi stepped into the palace gate again. Li Yi looked at Chang in front of him and said, Chang, we haven't seen each other for a few months. Even if you're not happy to see me again, you don't have to keep a straight face, do you? Changda looked back at him and said lightly, we haven't seen each other for a few months. County Marquis Li has made great progress. The foresight of a grandmaster was indeed sharp. To be able to receive such an evaluation from Lao Chang, Li Yi felt that he had the ability to try his luck in the heavenly list. If he were to encounter that white tiger envoy with the surname Fang again, he might not be at a disadvantage. In front of a certain palace, the sound of chattering could be heard. A few figures were chasing each other, laughing and playing. As he passed by, Li Yi saw a small figure running towards him from afar. A smile appeared on his face. He bent down and hugged her, lifting her up high. Then, he touched his nose and asked, did you miss me? Although Yongning did not say anything, she hurriedly took out a handful of candies from her bag, peeled them, and put them in Li Yi's mouth. Li Yi could not help but give her a kiss on her tender little face. At the same time, another figure also rushed over. Sir. The proud Lolita, who was over 12 years old, was like a child who would never grow up. After she flew over, she hung on him like an octopus. This posture was really indecent, so Li Yi could only hug Yongning with one hand and Yongning with the other. Fortunately, he was no longer the weak scholar at the beginning. Otherwise, his 2 arms would not be able to bear such a posture. It was too unscrupulous to hold 2 princesses and wander around the palace like this. After the initial excitement, the proud Lolita finally reacted and jumped down with a red face. However, she still held on to Li Yi's hand and did not let go. Sir's return meant that she could leave the palace to play again. Without Sir, Royal's sister was very busy, and she had not left the palace for a long time. Every time she came to the palace to see the old emperor, it would be the Hall of Diligent Government, the Hall of Legislative Affairs, or the Imperial Garden. This time, it was not any of these 3 places. When they walked to the door of a palace, Changda reminded him in a low voice, His Majesty has recently caught a cold. Try not to talk for too long. Li Yi still had a lot of things to do, so he did not want to talk for too long. He nodded and Changda opened the door. Li Yi followed him in. Changda walked to the couch inside and said in a low voice, Your Majesty, County Marquis Li has arrived. After not seeing him for several months, Emperor Jing seemed to have aged a lot. His face was sickly pale, and his body exuded the color of twilight. Li Yi looked up and took a step forward. He suppressed the shock in his heart and bowed, This subject greets Your Majesty. Chapter 734. When he saw Emperor Jing lying on the bed, Li Yi once again realized that this wise monarch seemed to be reaching the end of his life. The morning court session had stopped for almost 2 months. For Emperor Jing, who had never stopped this rule for more than 10 years, he would not do this unless he was at the end of his life. "You're back." Emperor Jing leaned on the bed and looked at something in his hand. When he looked at Li Yi, a smile appeared on his face. Li Yi nodded and said, "You're back." Emperor Jing got off the bed and looked up at him. Because of the implementation of the debit and credit law, the court has been arguing endlessly for more than a month. Countless officials of the Qi kingdom are in a mess because of this matter. It can be said that the whole court is in chaos. The first prince of the Qi kingdom proposed the law of discussing the silver of punishment. Someone pretended to be the imperial censor and the prince's personal guard. They took away 600,000 taels of silver from Bingzhou in the name of discussing the silver of punishment and disappeared. The people of the Qi kingdom are very resentful about the silver of punishment. Within a month, about 50,000 people in 3 places have revolted out of anger. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said slowly, "Should I let you stay in the Qi kingdom for a longer time? It is also a blessing for the Jing kingdom. If you stay for 8 or 10 years, the Qi kingdom may perish by itself." Li Yi was stunned and shook his head. "What are you talking about, Your Majesty? I don't understand." He really didn't know about the uprising. Even if there was an uprising, it had nothing to do with him. He couldn't take the blame for everything. The people of the Qi kingdom revolted because of such a trivial matter. Their hearts were really fragile. "It's good that you are safe." Emperor Jing waved his hand and didn't care. He said, "For the next few days, you should rest at home. Put other things aside for the time being." The other things he mentioned were naturally the affairs of the academy. In fact, there was also the Academy of Sciences. A few months was enough for him to understand that between the 2 academies, perhaps the latter was more important. No matter which one it was, Li Yi would be able to play an important role. Even if the old emperor didn't mention it, Li Yi would have mentioned it anyway. Rui was pregnant, and he had been away from home for nearly 5 months. He was really not a responsible husband. In the future, he naturally had to make up for it. How could he have the mood to care about other trivial things? No matter what, he had to take 2 years of paternity leave first. As for the academy, Li Han, that little fellow, was managing it pretty well. It was good enough for him to be the Grand Dean. Opportunities had to be left to these young people. While Li Yi was thinking about these things, Jing Di's gaze was always on him. The fact that Li Yi was abducted was indeed far beyond his expectations. However, even though he was abducted, he was still able to stir up such a great storm in the Qi kingdom, stirring up the imperial court, and forcing the people of several lands in the Qi kingdom to rebel. This indirectly eased the friction between the 2 kingdoms. Because they had to divide their energy to deal with the internal strife in the Qi kingdom, it wasn't that he didn't think about the matter of discussing the silver of guilt. He weighed the pros and cons in his heart, but in the end, it was rejected by Li Yi. At that time, in his heart, there was a slight doubt about the seriousness of this matter. However, after learning the news from the Qi kingdom, the trace of doubt in his heart disappeared completely. Although Li Yi usually didn't reveal his talents, his vision and judgment were rarely wrong. The only thing that had never changed was his lazy personality, which made people feel helpless from the beginning. A strange sound came from the hall, interrupting Jing Di's thoughts. He looked at Li Yi again. Li Yi touched his belly awkwardly and said, "I came out in a hurry just now, so I didn't eat much today. Ask the catering company to prepare something and send it over." Jing Di looked at Changda and ordered, "It just so happens that I am a little hungry." Li Yi didn't have time to refuse. In fact, what he meant was, "Are you done? If you haven't finished, hurry up and say it. If you are done, I will go back to eat." There are still a lot of things waiting to be done, however, he couldn't say this. If he angered the old emperor to death, he couldn't beat Chang. The catering company moved very quickly. It was very likely that it had been prepared a long time ago. Jing Di usually ate light food, and this time was naturally no exception. Li Yi wasn't proud of being able to eat with the emperor often. When Mississippi Lou was recuperating, they had been eating light food. It wasn't easy for them to come back, so they had to eat something, right? Moreover, this wasn't the only reason. There was another reason that he couldn't point out. The old emperor ate with relish alone, and Changda's old face relaxed a little as he looked at him. Li Yi raised his head to look at Changda. He thought of what he had just said, and then looked at the old emperor. He couldn't help but have a strange feeling in his heart. He had to accompany him to eat for the emperor to have an appetite. Was this an abnormal hobby that the old emperor had developed in Ning Wangfu? As he was thinking, Jing Di raised his head to look at him and asked, "Why aren't you eating? Is the food not to your taste?" Li Yi wanted to say something but stopped. He finally asked, "Has your majesty caught a cold these past 2 days? It's no longer a problem." Jing Di coughed lightly and said, "If it is not to your taste, Jin will order the catering company to make something else." Li Yi had a difficult expression on his face. "Your majesty knows that this official's wife is pregnant and her body is weak. If this official also catches a cold," Jing Di was very smart. Before Li Yi finished speaking, he understood what he meant. Then the expression on his face became a little dazed. Was he disdaining him? Disdaining the monarch of a country? Disdaining this matter that was regarded as a special honor by countless people? Even the 2 prime ministers in the court did not have the special honor of eating with him. Even if the ministers of the 6 departments received such an honor, they would most likely bathe and fast for 3 days, be deeply grateful, and kneel down to thank the emperor for his grace. But now, he was actually disdained by someone? Jing Di raised his head and saw his innocent face. His face darkened, and he waved his hand and said, "Get out of here immediately." "Get out of here, yes. This official takes his leave." Seeing Li Yi slip out like a rabbit, Changda looked at Jing Di and immediately said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This old servant will catch the boy and bring him back." Jing Di waved his hand, and a smile appeared on his face again. He said, "Changda, what do you think this boy will be like when he becomes a father?" Changda was stunned, and the scene of him holding the 2 princesses appeared in his mind. He shook his head and did not answer, but he still felt that the child of County Marquis Li should be very happy. After walking out of a certain palace, Li Yi's face showed a relaxed expression again. His worry was not unreasonable. If he was really infected by the old emperor, where could he go to cry? The world was big, and Rui was the most important. Everything else had to stand aside. But not long after, his relaxed expression gradually disappeared, and a trace of worry appeared between his eyebrows. He did not know how long the old emperor's body could last. According to the current situation, it was really not optimistic. He had no energy to manage too many state affairs. After completely delegating power, what would the situation in the court be like? "I'm afraid I have to make plans early." When passing by a certain place in the palace, Li Yi habitually stopped. You should be faster. Can you afford to make a mistake? And you, what are you looking at? You have nothing to do, right? If you have nothing to do, go and wash the dishes over there. Hurry up, do you not have ears? The manager of the catering hall was giving a lecture, and a group of people stood in a row in front of him. He enjoyed this feeling very much. In this small place, he was the absolute master. Since a certain day a few months ago, this feeling had become more and more intense. Every time he saw these people standing in front of him with their heads bowed and trembling, he would have an inexplicable sense of satisfaction in his heart. This sense of satisfaction was destroyed when several people in front of him raised their heads and looked behind him. "What are you looking at?" His face darkened. When he was about to give a lecture, he heard footsteps behind him. The manager looked back and saw a familiar figure coming in from outside. His whole body trembled, and something that he had built up with great difficulty in his heart was shattered. "Use the kitchen." After several months, the demonic voice once again rang in his ears. In the morning dew hall. The woman turned and moved, and the sword she whistled. With the eyesight of ordinary people, they could not even follow her movements. The white-haired old woman stood in the corridor, looked at the figure in front of her, and sighed slowly. A maid came over with a food box in her hand and said, "Nanny Roan, the catering hall sent food here." "Got it. You can leave now." The old woman took the food box, put it on the stone table beside her, and took out the food inside. She raised her head and said, "Princess, eat something first." Mingzu put away her sword, walked over, and said, "Leave it first. I don't have much appetite now." When she walked into the hall, a breeze blew, bringing some of the fragrance of the food. Mingzu stopped, turned her head, and walked straight to the stone table. Nanny Roan watched her pick up the golden fried rice with eggs, which was the princess's favorite food. However, in the past few months, she had never eaten the fried rice with eggs sent by the catering hall. Mingzu picked up the spoon and tasted a little bit. Suddenly, there was a glimmer of light in her beautiful eyes. Then she put down the spoon, raised one hand, and grabbed the arm that attacked her from behind. At the same time, she put down the plate of fried rice with eggs and leaned forward. Bang! Li Yi was pressed against the pillar outside the hall by her. The face that he had not seen for a long time but was familiar to him was so close that he could even see the slight tremble of her eyelashes. The Princess Royal Highness was still as domineering as before. She put one arm on his chest, and the two of them could even feel each other's breath. In this situation, Li Yi did not know if he should close his eyes to cooperate. Perhaps his first kiss today would be taken away by her just like that. Chapter 735. Li Yi's confidence suffered a severe blow when his sneak attack failed and he was knocked out instead. In these 5 months, in terms of training, he did not slack off at all. He slept very well every day. Even if he did not become a grandmaster expert like Ru Yi, unrivaled in the pugilistic world, he could at least be called a hero, right? But even if it was a sneak attack, Princess Royal could force him to the wall while eating, which made him doubt his strength. "You've made a lot of progress." Mingzu said this while eating egg fried rice, which was a blatant irony. Thinking that she was on par with second Miss Lu, she felt a little better in her heart. Mingzu threw a jar of wine over. Li Yi caught it and threw it back. "You're pregnant, so you can't drink." Mingzu nodded, patted the lid, and drank by herself. When the wine from the palace was sent here, it was served in exquisite utensils. Such a bold and unrestrained scene could only be seen in the morning dew hall. Mingzu asked him about what had happened in the past few months while eating. Li Yi briefly mentioned it and learned something about the women's college and the workshop. He looked at the sky and said, "It's getting late. I'll go back first. See you in a few days." It was a spur-of-the-moment idea just now. He felt that since he had come to the palace, it would be unreasonable if he didn't come to see her. He spent some time at the dining party, so he had to hurry back, or he would miss the meal. Mingzu continued to eat egg fried rice, waved her hand casually, and didn't look up. Her actions seemed to be careless, but half an hour later, when there was a sword whistling in the back hall, Nanny Roan still found that the sword in her hand was no longer as heavy as before, and it was a little more flexible and light. After having a clear understanding of his own strength, Li Yi planned to let Chang send him back. Not to mention Taoist none, even if there was a master as powerful as Princess Royal, the guards on the surface and in the dark, and himself, he was afraid that he would not be able to defeat her. However, when he walked out of the palace gate, Li Yi couldn't help but be startled. The sloppy old man squatted under a big tree not far away, directly facing the palace gate. There were already a lot of candy wrappers on the ground. Li Yi walked over, looked at him and asked in surprise, "Didn't Sue have something to buy? Why are you still here?" The sloppy old man straightened up and said, "I've already bought it. Do you want to go back? It's on the way." If the sloppy old man was passing by, then Chang wouldn't have anything to do with it. If there were really 2 grandmasters who had come together to kidnap him, Li Yi would accept it. Su Tian, Changda stood at the gate of the palace and watched the carriage leave. He thought of what Daoist Yuan had said before, and after spitting out the name, his eyes narrowed. On a certain street in Jingdo, the sloppy old man pointed forward and said, it seems like this is not the way to go back. That road is blocked. It's faster to go here. Listen to me, you're right. When the carriage reached a certain place, Li waved his hand and jumped out of the carriage. He said, Sue, wait here for a moment. I'll be right back. As he said this, he had already walked into the alley. Willow Alley was still Willow Alley. People came and went in the brothel next to the alley, but there were not many customers in the tea house in the alley. This was because the cost of the tea house was not low. Unknowingly, most people were blocked outside. At this moment, at a seat near the window of the tea house, a few young people looked out and saw a figure walking into the courtyard inside. At that moment, one of them couldn't help but chuckle. Ha, another one who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. After everyone looked over, there were a few whispers among themselves. I'm afraid he hasn't recognized himself yet. If it was so easy to see the goddess of Luo Shui, why would we be sitting here drinking tea? Wait until he gets the cold shoulder a few times and comes to his senses. I'm afraid there will be another person here drinking tea. The few of them didn't hide the sarcasm and laughter on their faces. They, who had gotten the cold shoulder countless times, could already imagine the look on the servant girl's face when she came out. Li didn't notice the few people in the tea house watching him make a fool of himself. After standing outside for a long time, he raised his hand and knocked on the door. The sound of footsteps came from inside, but the door didn't open. Then, there was a clear and angry voice. Miss is not here. Don't come again. Li was startled. When did Xiao Chui, this servant girl, become so fierce? He knocked on the door again. The footsteps had already gone far away, but they soon came closer. The courtyard door opened with a creak, and Xiao Chui poked her head out. She said with a bit of anger, How many times have I told you, don't come here, miss? She originally had a straight face as if she was lecturing them. Halfway through her sentence, her eyes suddenly widened and her voice became softer. Then, she rubbed her eyes in disbelief. After taking a closer look, she still didn't believe it, so she prepared to rub her eyes again. Li pulled her face. It was very elastic and full of collagen. After not seeing her for a few months, she was slightly fatter than before. It seemed that she had been eating well these days. He walked in by himself and asked, Is Ruoqing and your miss here? In the tea house opposite, the few young people who saw this scene all widened their eyes at the same time. He just pinched the servant girl's face? He just walked in like that? What right does he have? Voices of surprise and disbelief rang out. The sarcasm in the few people's hearts immediately turned into jealousy and anger. They had also visited countless times. Not only did they not see the Luo Shui goddess, they didn't even step into the courtyard. What right did this newcomer have to go in and pinch the servant girl's face? Immediately, one of them stood up and angrily asked the few people outside the tea house, Why didn't you stop him? Although he was still a little afraid of those people, the anger in his heart took the upper hand at this moment. At the entrance of the tea house, a man who sat there every day drinking tea asked in surprise, Did I see wrongly? One of his companions said, I saw it too. It should be right. As the two of them suppressed the shock in their hearts, they saw the young man walking over and questioning them loudly. He raised his head and glanced at him. Scram. If you don't scram, I'll break your legs. It was obvious that he had suffered a lot from these people. The young man retracted his head and left dejectedly. Xiao Chui came back to her senses. After closing the door, she immediately ran over and exclaimed in surprise, Li, you're back. Li nodded and asked, Where are Miss Ruoqing and your miss? Sister Ruoqing and miss left early in the morning. I don't know when they will be back. Xiao Chui looked at him and added, They really aren't here this time. Li, sit here for a while. I'll go pour you some tea. Seeing Xiao Chui run off quickly, Li did not sit down at the stone table. Instead, he walked towards the back. The door to the art room was unlatched. He pushed the door open and walked in. The furnishings inside were not too different from what he remembered. There were a few unfinished sketches of undergarments on the table. There were also many sketches hanging in the room. It was slightly messy. When he turned around to leave, he turned his head again and picked up a drawing on the table. Underneath it was also an unfinished drawing. It was a drawing of a young man bent over a table, painting. Li Yi stared at it for a long time before putting it back in its original position. Xiao Chui walked in with a cup of tea and said, "Miss and Sister Ruoqing might have gone to a brothel. I don't know where they went and when they will be back." "It's fine." Li Yi took the teacup and walked out of the art room. After taking a sip, he placed it on the stone table in the courtyard. His gaze looked around. Not long after, he turned back and smiled at Xiao Chui, saying, "When they come back, remember to tell me. I'll be leaving first." Li Yi walked out of the door, passed through Willow Lane, and got on the carriage. The sloppy old man glanced at him and said, "I just went over to take a look. That road is not blocked." Li Yi put down the curtain and said, "It's been blocked." Chapter 736. In the small courtyard, Xiaohuan bent over, put her ear on Rui's slightly bulging abdomen. After a while she raised her head, puzzled. "Why are you not moving? It's only been a few months, how can it be so easy to hear?" Li Yi pinched her face. By right, there should be movement at this time. But maybe because both Rui and he liked quiet, the little fellow did not move much. He moved his head closer. "Let me hear." That Sundra Loli stood beside Li Yi with her hands behind her back. She leaned forward and looked around curiously, blinking her eyes. Further away, Yongning was sitting on the swing while Duanwu was pushing her gently from behind. Rui looked at them with a smile on her face. This small courtyard, which had been quiet for a long time, finally became lively again. The news of Li Yi's return was not actually known to many people. He only went to the palace once. After returning home, he did not go out. Now it was already the third day. Mainly because it was not easy to come back, he wanted to have a few days of peace, spend more time with Rui. Once the news spread, the family would not be peaceful. Although the experience of these nearly 5 months, although it was more daunting than dangerous, turning misfortunes into blessings and even had some small gains, but after really experiencing it, only then did he know where the dangers lay, and also made him cherish what he had now. The present life was quiet and tranquil, but it was not easy to come by. Peace was indeed not easy to come by, although the news of his return was not widely spread, but there would always be some people who knew through various channels. Li Xian barged in with a black face, looked at him, said angrily, "You have been back for 3 days, and you did not tell me. If not for Emingzi mentioning it today, I still do not know about it." It was Li Yi's decision not to tell him for the time being. This fellow never thought of him when there were good things, but he could not forget troublesome things. If he wanted to live a leisurely life, he must avoid him. His dark face was obviously just an act. Li Xian had always been heartless, and his eyes were only filled with those strange things. The next second, an unconcealable joy appeared on his face, and he said, "Let's go out and have a drink to celebrate. Let's go to the Jade Courtyard, the old place." Fang, on the other hand, nodded his head fiercely, seemingly agreeing with this suggestion. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I won't be going to the Jade Field Courtyard. Since you're already here, stay for a meal." Li Xian asked, "Do you cook?" Li Yi nodded. In the days to come, Rui's 3 meals a day, he didn't plan on borrowing other people's hands. Li Xian nodded and said, "Then I won't be polite this time." Li Yi thought, "When have you ever been polite?" But he saw Li Xian slightly turn sideways, pointed to a person behind him and said, "Let me introduce, this is Shin Shu." Don't be fooled by his effeminate appearance, he is very capable. You'll know when you come to the Academy of Science in the future. County Marquis Li, the young man behind Li Xian, stepped forward and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi casually returned the salute. "Brother Shen, you're welcome." Li Yi rarely saw Li Xian being so enthusiastic to someone. It seemed that this Shin Shu should have some ability, so he couldn't help but look at him a few more times. Her skin was indeed soft and tender, and she looked effeminate. He only took a few more glances before shifting his gaze away. How is the princess's health? Li Xian waved his hand and said, she lives in the palace, and it's very good. There are several imperial doctors around her. Even if I want to see her, I have to get the concubine's permission. As he spoke, he suddenly thought of something and looked at Li Yi with a different gaze. Actually, I have an idea. Li Yi waved his hand and said, if it's about the Academy of Science, don't tell me first. We won't talk about these things for now. No. Li Xian shook his head quickly and said, Qin was pregnant at about the same time as your wife, so she should be giving birth at about the same time. Based on the relationship between our two families, why don't we just marry each other? Before Li Yi agreed, he immediately said, if it's a boy or a girl, let them be sworn brothers and support each other in the future. If it's a boy and a girl, let's marry each other. What do you think? No. Li Yi was resolute. Of course, he wouldn't agree on this matter. It would be fine if his family gave birth to a son. Although Li Xian was unreliable, he did have the looks of a decent man. His wife's beauty was also 1 in 1,000. Based on their genes, the daughter they gave birth to would not be too bad. It would be perfect for his son. But if it was the other way around and the boy from Li Xian's family wanted to harm his daughter, in his dreams. Li Xian's face was full of surprise. Why? Don't worry about the children. An arranged marriage is not a good idea. Li Yi glanced at him and said, for the sake of a marriage, I wonder who was the one who drank himself into a stupor in Qing and Fu. Shen Shu, who was at the side, looked at Li Xian with some surprise. It seemed that he had not expected him to have such a past. An awkward expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He hurriedly said, aren't we doing quite well now? Although he said this, there was not much confidence in his voice. It was clear that those days in the past were still fresh in his mind. Li Yi stood up, dusted his hands, and walked towards the kitchen. What Li Xian had said just now had its merits. It was fine to become sworn brothers, but as for the good of the Qin gene, that would depend on fate. In his previous life, he did not have a deep understanding of how scary an arranged marriage was. But now, he hated it with all his heart. For Li Xian and the heir's consort to have a happy ending, there were some coincidental factors involved. However, what happened to him involved the grudges between 2 generations. Even now, he still couldn't let go of it. That matter had become a dead knot. Li Xian freeloaded this meal without any pressure. During the meal, he talked about some of the problems that the Academy of Sciences was currently facing. Li Yi only gave him pointers where necessary. For Li Xian, the process of exploration and discovery was what gave him a sense of satisfaction. Don't tell anyone that I'm back for the time being. Before Li Xian left, Li Yi reminded him again. Although there were still many things to do, Li Yi did not want to be disturbed by other things at the moment. Li Xian waved his hand to indicate that he understood. Walking out of the courtyard, he habitually put his arm around Shen Shu's shoulder and said with a smile, this guy is like this. When you go back, remember not to tell anyone. Shen Shu frowned. He was still not used to his warmth. He discreetly removed his arm and said in a low voice, got it. Li Xian touched his nose and said, I say, can you be more like a man? You are so effeminate. Which girl will be willing to marry you in the future? None of your business. Shen Shu's voice finally rose a pitch. In the small courtyard, Li Yi could no longer hear these voices outside. He stood behind Rui and gently massaged her shoulders. Rui was still a little unaccustomed to this, but it was not appropriate for her to say it. She changed the topic and said, what Prince Li Xian said just now, are you really not going to consider it? Li Yi shook his head and said, marriage is not a child's play. How can we be so hasty and set a marriage for them so casually? I'm afraid that they will blame us. After a moment of silence, Rui said in a low voice, then, what about us? Li Yi stopped what he was doing. He thought for a moment and said, don't forget, you were the one who snatched me away. You weren't careless at all. Chapter 737. When a woman was pregnant, her emotions would inevitably become more sensitive. Li Yi did not feel any obvious difference from Ru Yi, but that did not mean that he could be as carefree as usual. Usually, when it came to dealing with small emotions, he would still take it seriously. The old emperor had tacitly approved of his paternity leave and did not send any more workers over. Even the academy did not urge him. For Li Yi, not being able to see Chang's face was something to be happy about. Mississippi Lu had always been restless, but these days, she had a rare moment of peace. Perhaps it was because she was stimulated by Taoist Nun. She practiced martial arts every day and would drag him to practice from time to time. She said that she wanted to increase her combat experience. The increase in combat experience was not very obvious, but the pain in his butt became more obvious every time. Li Yi felt that she was taking revenge. Apart from being a human sandbag, Li Yi was not busy these days. Most of the time, he cooked, chatted with her, and read some books on prenatal and postnatal care. As for the other things, he left them to Fong to handle. One of them was to buy a house in the city. It was surrounded by beautiful mountains and rivers and was good for the physical and mental health. Although this place was not far from the capital, it was still outside the city. There were no good places to go around. It was inevitable that he would feel depressed if he stayed at home all the time. Li Yi planned to move there as soon as possible. At that time, it would be more convenient for him to do everything. His favorite place should be Hibiscus Garden, Zhujiang Garden, and a few other places with good feng shui. The environment was good, and most importantly, there were no people. However, this was not a good request. A county marquis occupied the royal garden. It would be strange if the civil and military officials did not go crazy. These days, he often saw the sloppy old man at home. Previously, he thought that the sloppy old man had been entrusted by his second granduncle to travel thousands of miles to the Qi kingdom. Now, it seemed that this was not the case. He saw through it but did not say it. With a grandmaster by his side, the safety factor immediately increased. He originally thought that he could use a pile of white rabbit creamy candies to deal with him. Now, he even saved these things. Although there was nothing to do at home, the things that needed to be done were still piling up. For example, the Wang clan's glass business, the eldest princess's ready-made clothing, embroidery, military rations, and even the perfume, soap, and rui nectar that he didn't need to manage. He had too many businesses under his control. Although he didn't have to do everything himself, it was still necessary for him to understand them. Although these things had to be done sooner or later, they weren't that urgent, so Li Yi naturally pushed them off. There were things that needed to be done, and there were naturally people that needed to be seen. As the carriage passed through the capital once again, the sloppy old man finally understood when he saw the complicated expression that flashed across Li Yi's face. However, it was not the road that was blocked. Perhaps it was something else. Zumo, do you still remember when you were a child, you loved to eat the Su Ji's candied plums? At that time, your mother was afraid that you would break your teeth and wouldn't let you eat it, so you secretly saved up money to sneak out. You were almost caught by a trafficker, and the whole family was scared out of their wits. In a small courtyard deep in Willow Lane, a middle-aged man in a blue robe stood there with a smile on his face. He said, "A few days ago, I had been looking for that shop. I ran all over the capital but couldn't find it. Only yesterday did I find out that it was the Su Ji, but it later changed its name." He placed a paper bag on the stone table, opened it, and said, "It's on Xingping Street. It's now called Fuji. When I came just now, I bought some along the way. Try it and see if it tastes the same as before." Zheng Zumo looked at the paper bag on the table and the candied fruits inside. A trace of confusion appeared on her face, mixed with some memories from so long ago that she couldn't remember them at all. How long ago was that? 11 years, 12 years, or 13 years? At that time, her mother was very strict with her. Being able to eat Su Ji's candied plums was probably the happiest thing in her life. However, this small wish was actually not very likely to come true. At that time, although her father's official position was not high, he was very strict. Even though the candied plums from the Su Ji worldwide commerce were not worth much, if she really wanted to eat them to her heart's content, second uncle would secretly buy them for her, and she would eat them under the blanket at night. At that time, she and her second uncle were not like this. However, things in this world could never return to yesterday, let alone 13 years ago. Seeing that she was unmoved, the middle-aged man's eyes dimmed slightly, but he concealed it well and said, "Tomorrow is the Xing family's banquet. I have a lot of things to do tomorrow." Xing Shichen was taken aback. He shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. There will be more opportunities in the future." He looked at the sky and said, "Second uncle still has work to do, so I'll leave first. I'll come see you tomorrow." Only when the middle-aged man turned to leave did Xing Zumo look up. A hint of pain flashed through the depths of her eyes. "It's all in the past." Wan Ruoqing walked out of the house and looked at her with some heartache. She placed her hand on her shoulder and said softly. Some long-sealed memories emerged from her mind. Xing Zumo bit her lip, and her face was a little pale. She held Wan Ruoqing's hand tightly and nodded. "It's all in the past." Li Yi walked to the door of the small courtyard. He estimated that Ruoqing and Xing Zumo should not be there at this time. After hesitating for a moment, he still planned to knock on the door. The courtyard door opened from the inside, and a middle-aged man in a blue robe walked out from inside. Li Yi's movement paused slightly. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Xing Shichen. Why was he here? When Xing Shichen walked out of the courtyard, he probably thought that the young man outside the courtyard door was some kind of crazy bees and butterflies. These kinds of people had appeared frequently recently, and he had encountered them countless times. His gaze did not even linger on the man's face, and he simply brushed past him. However, after taking 2 steps, he seemed to think of something and turned back abruptly. At this time, the young man had already walked into the courtyard, and the courtyard door was closed. Xing Shichen froze in place, and then a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Crazy bees and butterflies? If it was just crazy bees and butterflies, it was impossible to enter this courtyard. That person just now, was it him? Li Yi walked into the courtyard, closed the door, and walked inside. When he was still thinking about why he would meet the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue here. If he remembered correctly, the other seemed to belong to the Cui family, and was a firm supporter of the King of Shu. Although there was no direct confrontation with him in the court, this person's status in the King of Shu's faction was not low, and he still had this impression. What puzzled him was that without the permission of the two, it was impossible for outsiders to enter this courtyard, and Xing Shichen was alone. For the time being, he could not figure out these things. Thinking that Xiao Cui should know something, Li Yi passed through the moon door and saw a figure sitting at the stone table in front of him. He said, "Xiao Zomo?" Xiao Cui said these 2 words halfway before realizing that the person sitting there was Miss Xing. Her brain was a bit short-circuited, and she suddenly changed her words, sounding like Xiao Zumo. Xing Zumo and Wan Ruoqing raised their heads at the same time, and the atmosphere in the courtyard began to become a bit awkward. After Li Yi's footsteps stopped, he showed a smile that he thought was brilliant, and waved his hand, saying, "You are all here, what a coincidence." Chapter 738. When they looked up, the 2 women were startled for a moment. Then, joy quickly appeared on their faces. Xiao Cui had said that he had returned to the capital, but they had missed him a few days ago. In fact, they had not gone out these days. The joy on Xing Zumo's face was quickly concealed. Wan Ruoqing quickly took a few steps forward and then paused. Although she was excited, her voice turned into calmness. Xiao Cui said before that she thought you would come over in a few days. Li Yi nodded. Without any courtesy or awkwardness, he nodded and said, "I've been delayed by some matters these few days." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked with a smile, "How is Madame Li?" Neither of them noticed that Xing Zumo's body trembled slightly when she heard this. She looked at Li Yi and then quickly looked away. "She is fine." Li Yi looked back and asked, "Was the one who went out just now Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue?" The security around Willow Alley was not low. However, all of this was on the premise that they did not disturb their daily lives. Those ignorant playboys or those with ulterior motives could not even get close to the gate. However, if they had their permission, no one would stop them. Wan Ruoqing nodded and then turned to look at Xing Zumo. Xing Zumo had already stood up and walked over. Looking at Li Yi, she said softly, "I am sorry." Huh? Li Yi was startled, not knowing why she would suddenly say this. "I was actually at home that day." Xing Zumo lowered her head. "If it wasn't for me, this would not have happened." This matter had actually been buried in her heart for a long time. The two emotions of self-blame and guilt intertwined in her heart every day. It was only at this moment, when she saw that he was safe and sound with her own eyes, that her heart could finally be at ease. Li Yi finally remembered that he had been to Willow Lane that day. At that time, Xiaotsui said that Xing Zumo was not there. When he went back, he met the Taoist nun. At this moment, he smiled and waved his hand, as if he didn't care about this matter at all. He said, "This has nothing to do with you. She originally planned it. If it wasn't that day, it could have been the second day, or the third day." Instead of asking why Xing Zumo asked Xiao Chui to lie that day, Li Yi looked at her and asked uncertainly, "That assistant minister Zheng?" Xing Zumo whispered, "It's my second uncle." Suddenly hearing this news, Li Yi was startled. He looked at her and asked, "This? What is going on?" He could feel Xing Zumo's emotions at this moment. After saying this, he immediately changed his words. "If it's not convenient, it's not inconvenient." Xing Zumo shook her head. "It's all in the past." She walked towards the door. "I'm about to go to the shop. Let's talk on the way." Li Yi really didn't expect that she actually had such a story. More than a decade ago, the Xing family was not very prominent, but in the capital city, it was also regarded as a rich family. Of course, the Xing family at that time was not the Xing family now. Xing Zumo's father seemed to be a small official in the Ministry of Revenue. Later, because of a mistake in an important matter, he was involved in the struggle in the court and was pushed to the teeth of the storm. As a result, the direct line of the Xing family suffered a heavy blow. The men were punished, beheaded or exiled, and the women were sent to the musical house, while the others were safe. Later, the second branch of the Xing family got in touch with the Chui family, so the Xing family recovered. Zheng Shichen was even promoted to the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. In fact, today's Xing family was more prominent than 10 years ago. As a direct line of the Xing family, Xing Zumo was implicated at a very young age. After several twists and turns, she moved to the musical house, the Jade Courtyard, and then redeemed herself and came to the capital city. She had never mentioned these things before, so it was the first time for Li Yi to know. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Are there any family members in the musical house now?" Xing Zumo shook her head and said, "My mother had committed suicide before they came to confiscate our house. In fact, I am the only one." Li Yi had heard about what happened in the musical house and the brothel, and then associated it with her decisive and almost stubborn character. He could roughly imagine how she grew up step by step from the daughter of an official to become what she was now. How many hardships and suffering she had suffered, even if he had lived 2 lives, he could not understand it at all. Thinking of these things, he inexplicably felt a little sad in his heart. Xing Zumo inadvertently raised her head and happened to catch a certain expression on his face. Li Yi's heart sank. He was worried that with her character, she might regard this as pity, so he hurriedly explained, "Don't." Seeing his nervous look, Xing Zumo smiled, and a trace of warmth surged in her heart. She asked, "What about you? Where have you been these months?" Ruoqing, who had not spoken all the way, also turned to look at him. All the way to the west, first to Shuzhou, and then stayed in the Qi kingdom for 2 months. Li Yi gave a brief account of his journey over the past few months. As for the dangerous parts, he naturally skipped over them in a single sentence. Even so, the 2 women heard something different from his words. They clenched their fists in their sleeves, but did not show the slightest emotion on their faces. A few steps behind him, the shock on the face of the sloppy old man had never faded. At this moment, he finally understood why that shortcut was always blocked. Li Yi did not say much on this topic. When passing by a clothing store, he cleverly changed the topic. In terms of clothing, the capital city had undoubtedly set the trend for the Jing kingdom and even the surrounding countries. The dazzling array of clothing had caused the eyes of the women to be dazzled. As for undergarments, most of the women had already accepted them. Although there were still some conservative women who still resisted, they could no longer affect the vigorous reform of undergarments. The brothel had not changed much. In fact, the operating model had matured, and the number of brothels in the capital had long reached saturation. In these months, in addition to expanding to more distant states and counties, they also took root in their respective places, and gradually became a daily thing for the people. Every midnight, Wan Ruoqing would vaguely remember that more than a year ago, when the brothel was about to close and everyone was worried about their livelihood, he broke into everyone's sight with a disdainful attitude. At first, he just wanted to live and survive in such a world. Later, he didn't have to worry about living, and he wanted to let the performers of Qing and Mansion live a better life. Later, it became what it was today. The magnificent picture that he had imagined at the beginning would probably be realized in the near future. Li Yi estimated the time and said, "It's getting late. Let's find a place to eat first. Why don't we go back and cook?" Wan Ruoqing suggested. Li Yi pointed to the restaurant in front and said, "In a while, we'll go to the shops and brothel in front to take a look. Let's make do here first." Wan Ruoqing nodded, and Zheng Zumo naturally had no objections. Ever since all kinds of new plays began to rise in the capital, whether it was the common people or the powerful officials, many people had developed the habit of listening to plays. Many restaurants in the capital had also undergone some changes. After entering the restaurant, the first thing they faced was a stage that was half the height of a person. On the stage, there were performers specially hired by the restaurant to perform for the guests to enjoy. In the lobby on the first floor, facing the stage, the tables were arranged in the shape of stars. The position on the second floor was better, and one could see the whole scene from a high place. Of course, the corresponding price was more expensive. When Li Yi and the two women walked into the restaurant, it should be mealtime, but there weren't many customers eating. From the outside, this should be a high-end restaurant. Ordinary people probably couldn't afford it, so it was normal for such a situation to occur. Soon, a waiter came to greet them. At this time, somewhere on the second floor, wine glasses were clinked, but they were not taken back. Seeing this, someone asked curiously, "Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" Chapter 739. The table of banquets upstairs had always affected the heart of this restaurant's shopkeeper. To be able to open a restaurant here with a high standard meant that there must be some sort of backer behind them. At the very least, that backer could help them avoid most of the troubles they encountered on a daily basis. However, in front of certain people, there would come a time when these people would not be enough. The table upstairs belonged to this category. These rich young masters of the capital might not have much ability themselves, but their family backgrounds were often dukes or third-rank officials of the imperial court. They could not be provoked. Fortunately, although there were a few tables upstairs, they were quite far away from each other, so they were safe. The shopkeeper withdrew his gaze from them and looked at a group of people walking through the door. One of them was a young man who looked very unfamiliar, but he was quite handsome. Beside him were two women who were extremely outstanding in appearance. However, the sloppy-looking old man who was following behind the three of them ruined the atmosphere, causing the four of them to look a little strange. He called for a waiter to go over and wait for him. He no longer paid attention to them and focused on moving the abacus in his hand. Speaking of which, this thing made by the academy was really useful. Using this thing called abacus to calculate accounts was much faster and more convenient than before. Young Master Qin, what's wrong?" At a table on the second floor, the young man carefully asked again. "Nothing." Qin Yu finally withdrew his hand and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. His expression was calm as if nothing had happened. The young man turned his head and looked down. His gaze swept past a certain place and he was slightly startled. Then, he withdrew his gaze and thought of a certain rumor about this young Duke Qin. His heart immediately understood. He looked down again, and his heart suddenly became lively. Young Master Qin, I'll take my leave for a moment. After another round of toasting, the young man stood up and said apologetically. Then, he turned and walked down the stairs. Qin Yu's gaze moved slightly. He glanced down but did not stop him. Wei Liangjun was the son of a newly appointed assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights. Although he was not directly under the Qin family, he had a deep relationship with the Qin family. Assistant Minister Wei had just been appointed, but in a short period of time, he had made many achievements. His reputation in the court was quite good, and he was a figure that the Qin family was pushing forward. Across from Qin Yu, Tsing Zijian glanced downwards. His face darkened and his facial expression twitched. That man and woman had left an indelible impression in his heart. However, hatred was just hatred. It didn't stop him from thinking that Wei Liangjun, who thought he was smart, was a complete idiot. In the past 5 months, a storm had been brewing in the capital. Some officials had been banished from the capital, but naturally, there were also some officials who had emerged and entered the center of power. The momentary glory made some idiots feel that they could do whatever they wanted in this place. However, he didn't care about how handsome Wei Liang was. Although he didn't want to see that person, he couldn't help but look down. Did that person finally come back? Qin Yu's expression was calm. He pretended to be courteous to the young masters around him who wanted to climb up to the Qin family. As he raised his head to drink, a trace of darkness emerged in the depths of his eyes. Li Yi was ordering dishes. Ordering dishes was actually a science. There were many people ordering how many dishes, how hot or cold, how much soup or dry. All of these were things that had to be paid attention to. In the future, there were even special training for this. But today, everyone here was on the same side, so there was no need to worry about this. Xiao Chui was a qualified intelligence agent. She had unintentionally revealed to him what dishes Xing Zumo and Wan Ruoqing liked to eat. As for the sloppy old man, it was enough for him as long as he had candy to eat. When he ordered the 7th dish, Wan Ruoqing said, "This is enough. There are only a few of us, so we can't eat so much." Li Yi ordered another dish and soup, and then he waved the waiter away. He didn't have to worry about wasting food. Since his martial arts had improved by leaps and bounds, his appetite had increased greatly. A mere 8 dishes and a soup was simply a piece of cake. Across from him, Miss Zhang seemed to have a lot on her mind. She didn't say a word, and occasionally she would be absent-minded. Li Yi guessed that it should have something to do with Assistant Minister Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue. The fall of the Zheng family 10 years ago seemed to be inextricably linked to him, so it was no wonder that Xing Zumo's mood was affected. He had heard Xiao Chui mention before that she would never come to the capital in this life because of this reason. Li Yi was considering whether to tell those people that if Xing dared to run around in the future and spoil their mood, he would break his legs so that he could go to court with crutches in the future. Wan Ruoqing didn't speak much of the truth, but as long as it was about the brothel or the shop, she would become talkative. Li Yi was not a qualified boss. These things were actually taken care of by her. To be able to manage such a big business in an orderly manner, so that he did not have to worry about the future, for a woman, it was really not easy. Such a woman should be very good at running a household. Just when Li Yi's mind was somewhat anchored, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Ladies, are you interested in going up for a drink?" Of course, this sentence was not directed at him. When Li Yi looked over, he saw a strange man coming from behind, holding a wine glass in his hand. At this time, he was looking at Wan Ruoqing and speaking. There was always no lack of lascivious men around beautiful women. This kind of situation was very common in this era, not only in this era, but also in the future. Wan Ruoqing was originally talking to Li Yi with a smile on her face. She looked back and calmed down. She shook her head and said, "Sorry, we don't know you." "It doesn't matter. Don't you know me now?" The smile on the young man's face was even wider. He said with a smile, I am Wei Junliang, and my father is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. From the moment he walked over to the moment he said these words, he had not looked at Li Yi once. There was no need at all. After all, there were many spoiled brats in the capital, and there were many that he could not afford to offend. But before this, he had already done his homework. He was already familiar with those people's identities and appearances, but this young man in front of him was not included. Moreover, if he really was someone of status, how could he not have two decent guards by his side? As for the old man who looked like he was about to enter his coffin, he automatically ignored him. Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights? Li Yi thought about it and asked, isn't the Assistant Minister Chen Bo? Zhang Zumo glanced at him and said in a small voice, a few months ago, the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was removed from his position and imprisoned. The current Assistant Minister's surname is Wei. Li Yi shook his head and said, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, a fourth-rank official. How can he be changed so easily? It's really not easy to be an official nowadays. Zhang Zumo looked at him in surprise. The reason the original Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was investigated was because of the account investigation a few months ago. In that matter, Wan Ruoqing's expression changed slightly when she heard the words Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. She glanced at Li Yi and wondered if this matter would affect him in any way. Then, she looked at the young man and said, apologies, my friend is here. Are you talking about this young lady? The smile on Wei Junliang's face was still there. He said, no problem, this young lady can come with us, apologies. Wan Ruoqing's tone was calm. Wei Junliang's expression darkened. He said coldly, this is not giving me face. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.